Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here not just to talk about stuff. We're here to talk about a very particular stuff that is very near and dear to our hearts, to your hearts, to the inception and DNA of this show. We are talking about Persona. We're not just talking about Persona. We're talking about Persona 5, The Royal, known as Persona 5 Royal in the West without the definite article, which is a worse title.
Yeah.
Persona 5 The Royal, a game that came out here in the States in 2020. At the time, we were planning to talk about it, and then things were crazy. You might remember there was a pandemic, all this shit. Anyway, we wound up not playing Persona 5 Royal for a while, which has led to a lot of people, from my brother to various listeners, playfully harassing us online for years. When are you doing the Persona 5 Royal podcast? We're doing it today, motherfuckers. I've played Persona 5 The Royal. Yeah. You have played Persona 5 The Royal.
Yes, I played Persona 5 The Royal like 3 months ago or something. Maybe even longer than that when I finished it. It might be 4 months at this point.
Collectively, we have spent, 250 hours playing Persona 5 The Royal.
Yes.
Because it's long. My final play clock was 116 hours, but I think if you added in some reloads and stuff, it was probably closer to 120.
That's about mine, yeah.
Yeah, so like 240, 250 hours between the two of us for the making of this podcast, where we will be doing our big thoughts on Persona 5 The Royal. And it's pretty good. I liked it.
Yeah, no, I thought they did a good job. You know, it was fun. I liked the story. I liked the gameplay, and I thought it had some good style. I'd give it a 10.
Yeah.
Out of 10.
The music's pretty good.
Yep.
It's got that bass. Sean, let's recap for the people. Persona 5 came out in 2016 in Japan. You imported it and played it you got it digitally, but you played it that year in Japanese. So first game you ever played in Japanese, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was one of the first big things I did, because that was a little bit after we graduated college, and I was like, I need to make sure I actually do stuff with the Japanese I've learned, because I know a lot of people who got very good at a language and then didn't do anything with it for over a year, and then everything they knew about that language was gone. I was like, I need to make sure that doesn't fucking happen.
Yeah.
I worked very hard to learn the amount of Japanese I know. So yes, that was one of the big things I did, was just being because I remember I didn't even tell you about it, because as soon as the thought occurred to me, I'm like, I'm gonna bring this up on a podcast out of nowhere, and I just was I'm just gonna fucking go for it. I didn't know if it would be feasible for me to actually be able to do it, but yes, that was the first big game I played in Japanese, and Japanese only. And yes, that was a very interesting experience.
Yeah, and you can go back and find the podcast where you reveal to me, it's at the end of an episode, that you're playing Persona 5, and I have a small meltdown of jealousy. Very, very funny. That was 2016. 2017, the game comes out, and we played it and reviewed it in real time. My first time through, your second time through. Those episodes were all compiled into a 10.5-hour spoiler cast that is, I still think, if I add up all the platforms it's been out over the years, our highest downloaded episode of the Weekly Stuff podcast is our 10.5-hour Persona 5 spoiler cast compilation. So obviously we liked the game. It was funnily enough, it was both of our number 2 games of 2017, because 2017 was a crazy year where Nier Automata came out, your favorite game ever.
Yep.
And Zelda Breath of the Wild came out, one of my favorite games ever, and that was my number 1, but we both had Persona 5 at number 2. No insult to Persona 5, one of our favorite games ever. Obviously, you all know how much we love Persona 3 and 4, and how, literally, I think the Persona 4 episode is the end of Season 1 of this podcast, 2012, is when you talked about Persona 4 for the first time. So It has been part of the DNA of this show for 10 years now. But Persona 5, we both called it the best video game soundtrack of all time when we did our video game soundtracks episode. I would say that's extra true after The Royal. Mm-hmm. And anyway, now, a couple years later, Atlus, as they are wont to do, did a redux version of Persona 5 The Royal, which is similar in sort of mission to Persona 3 FES and Persona 4 The Golden, but honestly even bigger than in scale, where they have added a whole third semester to the game with a whole new batch of content and plot. A lot of that is seeded throughout the game, alongside a lot of other little changes that I'm sure we will talk about today. But then it does pretty radically restructure the denouement and ending of the game. And all together, I think it's even better, which is insane, because Persona 5 I think we would both agree, in its vanilla original form, was one of the most polished, perfect games ever made. They somehow found a way to polish it even more. And I'll say I finished Persona 5 The Royal a couple nights ago, Sean. I have not been able to get it out of my head. The stuff this game does is so powerful, and it's so crazy for it to be technically me sort of replaying the game, but it felt so brilliantly, beautifully new. I to the point where I just in my head kind of wonder if this might just be the best video game ever made.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it's in that conversation for sure. Because yes, I mean, this is an instance where I think like top to bottom, Persona 5 The Royal is just the best version of the game. Like, there were moments where I was worried because like they do some really like big, bold, interesting things with like how they add new content in at the end of the game, that there's like a crossroads where I'm like, either this is going to be fucking amazing or they're going to ruin the ending of the game. And luckily they went on the we're going to make it fucking amazing route.
I had the exact same journey with it, Sean, where at first I was like, I'm not sure about this, and like not sure in a good way. I was like this could go either way, and then it went the right way, and holy crap.
Yeah, because they don't play it safe. Like they don't like they make a really big swing with like where and how they add the new content, which is I think one of the things that makes it like immediately more interesting to me than like Persona 4 The Golden as like an updated version of one of these games. But then also they stick the landing so incredibly hard to improve even on the original Persona 5 to make this like easily definitive version, where Persona 4 The Golden I'm like a little bit mixed on. There are things that version of the game adds that I really love. There are things that version of the game adds and changes that like I'm not as big of a fan of. And then I've never played the vanilla version of Persona 3, but looking at the changes, Persona 3 Fest seems like a pretty like objectively better version of the game because it adds just a bunch of things that seem very vital. But also that game then offloads most of the like fully original content into this sort of like optional epilogue thing called episode, I guess, in the Japanese version. I think it's called The Answer in the English version, which is a terrible name. Episode, I guess, is hilarious. They should have just called it that.
Yes.
But that is like, you know, I enjoyed that a lot, but it, like most people, and I know that you, Jonathan, like either didn't get all the way through it because it's so combat heavy, or like there are lots of people who just don't like it. But it kind of is segmented off so it doesn't affect the rest of Persona 3 Fest. Like, this is kind of like if you did a really, really good version of episode I guess and integrated it, like, organically within the existing story of the game, which is a much more significant change than any of the other updated versions of Persona that they've done.
It's very true, and I think it is, like, narratively, I do have a couple of little gameplay quibbles with the Royal, I will point out, mainly around some of the difficulty components of the game. I think it's too easy. But I do think the narrative components are just holistically and wholly better than vanilla Persona 5. I think everything they add for that big, third semester stuff, which then ripples throughout the entire game, I think it makes every inch of the game richer and more interesting, and I think how it sort of combines, dovetails, and expands upon the original denouement of Persona 5 makes it, like, kind of exponentially more powerful to me, and I wouldn't have thought that was possible because I really liked the ending to the original Persona 5, and I found it very impactful. And what they do here, I think, is not just more impactful, but somehow has reanimated the game to feel even more of the times we live in than it already was. And I think we spend a lot of time in that original spoiler cast talking about just how of the moment Persona 5 felt. And I think the Royal, even 2 years out from its release, feels so of the moment. It is just a holistic masterpiece of a game.
Yeah, it's yeah, I don't know if like obviously I was gonna say I don't know if I have anything to add to that. I'm like, but now we have to record like a 3-hour podcast. But yes, it's a masterpiece. Like it's one of the best games ever made. And it was particularly fun because I'm pretty sure the last like mainline Persona thing I played was that playthrough of Persona 5, which is like this point is like 5 years ago or so. Because I it's one of those things where like I keep on thinking about replaying Persona 3 or 4. But those are very long games, and so I just haven't made time for them since. So, like, one of the things that was fun about playing Persona 5 The Royal was just, like, coming back to Persona after a fairly long absence from the main games. Obviously, I've been playing, like, the dancing games and some of the spin-offs and watching some of the anime adaptations, like the Persona 3 movies and stuff. in the interim. But this was like kind of going back and be like, oh right. Also, this isn't just like the story and the characters and the music and all that's so good. It's like also these games are just incredibly fun to play. And that's the thing that
Yes.
it's like almost like easy to forget when you haven't played one of them in a while, that like I think the narrative stuff overshadowed, the aesthetic stuff overshadows the fact that just as a pure raw fucking video game, holy shit, it's just so much fun to play. And then you get all the other stuff on top of that, and rediscovering my like love for the design of Persona games. It was one of the things that was very fun about playing Persona 5 The Royal.
I mean, it is truly, truly crazy that this is a 120-hour game for both of us, and it is not a slog, it is not a chore, it is pretty much pure joy from start to finish. I have played much shorter games that feel much, much longer to me. My God, like, it's a really remarkable thing, and the Royal just, in almost all respects, makes it more remarkable. And I'm just, there's so many things I'm blown away with in this game. And one place I do want to start, Sean, just because it's not quite specific to the Royal, is that this was also my first time playing through this game in Japanese. So when Persona 5, the vanilla version, came out, they did add a dual language option via DLC, the free DLC that you could download, but it was not on the disc. And I wound up just playing Persona 5 in English because 3 and 4 had no dual language option, so you had to play them in English. And their dubs are very good. Those are still the 3, 4, 5 are the best English language dubs of a video game or a movie I've ever seen. Easy. It's not really a contest. They're really well done. And you and I are not big dub people, but we will happily say that, right? They're very well done. And so that's how I played Persona 5 originally, and I still think it's an excellent dub. No shade on it at all. But I really did want to play it in Japanese this time. One thing I love about the Royal is if you have the PS4 disc, they just put the Japanese voices on the disc, so you don't have to download it or anything, which is cool. And I was very excited to play it through in Japanese, in part because the game does co-star Shuichi Ikeda, our boy from Mobile Suit Gundam, who plays Char Aznable, but it's got a cast of giants, basically, and then other various extremely talented people. And just as much as all the additions of the Royal really pulled me through this playthrough in a compelling way, playing this in Japanese, I wanted to devote a couple minutes here, Sean, just to talk about those performances, because
we should do more than a couple of minutes, dude. Cause
I know.
Because they're fucking really good. Yeah,
it's the best voice acting I've ever heard in a video game, bar none. There's no comparison. There's other games I've heard with phenomenal voice acting. You know, one way I put it the other day is that I do think Persona 5 in English is one of the best English casts I've ever heard. The difference is that Persona 5 in Japanese is the best cast in any language I've ever heard in a video game. And, like, that's kind of the scale we're talking about here. I mean, and I have not played through 3 and 4 in Japanese, which I aspire to do at some point. And 4 Golden now has Japanese on the PC version. 3, you can get the undubs that people have made for PS2 for your emulators. It's very easy to find. And I've heard the Persona 3 cast in the movies and the Persona 4 cast in the anime. But I mean, at every turn, the voice cast in this game stuns me. And if you've only played Persona 5 in English, I would at the very least recommend you find some key scenes on YouTube and watch them in Japanese, because it's a really remarkable thing.
Yeah, because one of the things with like our journey with the language options of this game is that I remember, so obviously when I played the Japanese version, that was the Japanese version. You know, they didn't have an English dub option of it would have been impossible to play that game with Japanese text in English. I don't know if I would be able to understand anything that was happening. I wouldn't be able to understand what was being said in English. I wouldn't be able to read what was happening in Japanese. Like, I don't think I could process information through English audio. Japanese subtitles would be insane. But obviously, you know, I just played the Japanese version with the Japanese voices. But, like, I remember we had a specific conversation, probably off the air, about, like, that when the English language version came out, which was only, like, 6 months after the Japanese version. Also, it's not like it was a full year, because it was fall 2016 for the Japanese version. It was spring 2017 for the English version. And I was like, oh, yeah, because I think you said you wanted to do the English cast. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'll do the English cast also, so we're both playing with the same version. And then when I played the English language version, I played the first couple of hours with the English cast, and I couldn't do it. Not because the English cast was bad, but because, like, the Japanese performances were so, like, indelible. that it was just too hard for me to just not replay that game, because I went in thinking like, oh, it'll make it easier for me to replay the game after such a like short time off of it if I'm playing it with a different cast, but it just actually made it harder. So I reverted to the Japanese cast. So, and then obviously I played with the Japanese cast for this playthrough as well, because I definitely feel like after this playthrough, especially because in the like intervening 4 years since the last time I played Persona 5, like my like knowledge and experience of Seiyu, which is like the Japanese word for voice actors, and like my knowledge and experience with Japanese and like that culture and the different shows that a lot of these actors have been on and stuff like that is a lot greater than it was the last time I played the game. And so I feel like my appreciation for what they're doing is like even bigger than it was before, like making me feel very confident in saying that I think this is like the best cast for any game I've ever played, giving the best performances in any game I've played, because it really is the casting, like top to bottom, is so well assembled. It's a lot of like a good spread of some like really veteran voice actors, and then a couple of like who were at the time relatively new, although even the people who were relatively new had led at least one or two big popular shows. All the major characters in this game are people who are leads in multiple like big industry defining anime, and so it is a cast of people who are super good at what they do, but then thinking about the balance of the ages, the experience level, and like the quality of their voices, and then also getting them interesting roles to play, sometimes like with Miyano Mamoru as Ryuji against type, in a way to make a really fascinating assemblage of cast members with an incredibly powerful script, because the writing in Japanese is better than the writing in English. Like I just think there's no way for it not to be, by like the nature of what it is, and it's just it is the best performances I've ever seen in a game, and it would take a lot for something to be able to top this.
It really would. One way to organize this, Sean, can I just go through? I made a little top 5 list of my top 5 voices in the game, and then we can hit on anyone else we want to. But can we at least talk about these 5?
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about all of them, but yeah, go ahead.
I know. Well, we're only doing one podcast today, so
I don't fucking care. I want to talk about all of them.
Okay, but I feel like my number one, and it's an obvious number one, because I think any discussion of Persona 5 has to start and end with this character and with this voice, is Ikue Otani as Morgana. Mm-hmm. Best performance in the game? Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, and the most important one. Ikue Otani obviously has one of the most storied careers in all of voice acting. She is arguably the most recognizable voice on planet Earth because she is Pikachu, but she is also Tony Chopper in One Piece and all sorts of other things. But I still think her work as Morgana is kind of breathtakingly phenomenal. Like, I think it's the best thing she's ever done as an actor. Mm-hmm. And it is... it's the voice of the game. It is the voice of the game, and it is the lead of this. It is the lead character in the cast in terms of voice acting. She has by far the most lines. She is the voice for the protagonist, basically, as well, because he doesn't speak. It's a stunning performance.
Yeah, and she's the most experienced voice actor amongst the main cast, right? So it is definitely like both the character and her as an actress are the most veteran and like the leader of the group. Like obviously in the game, technically the playable character is the leader, but in terms of like actual narrative content, the nature of the playable character being silent effectively means that Morgana is the one placed as the sort of, like the guiding light of the group that knows the most about what's going on. And yeah, Ikue Otani's ability to both retain the kind of like cute mascot nature of the character, right? Because all of these games have had like a kind of mascot-y character, and Morgana is one of those, but also having like this really powerful dramatic core and so much pathos to who Morgana is and his journey, like trying to sort of discover himself in his sort of like process of self-denial and then self-discovery, is such a powerful character arc that is driven by that performance that has, the largest number of line reads that are ones that I stop and go into the log or whatever and re-listen to multiple times because they're very incredibly funny, and sure, like comic timing is so finely tuned in. But also Morgana has like some of like the most poetic and like touching dialogue in the game, particularly in the last what is like one of the last cutscenes in the original game when you defeat Jaldabaoth, the original last boss, and Morgana like seemingly is going to disappear. And tells you sort of that, there is no such thing as the real world. We all make the world as we see it. Like some of those line reads are so powerful because Ikue Otani's performance is so well dialed across the multiple sort of tones and styles that this very extreme character exists in.
There's a range to it that is stunning, from the little fun mascotty lines to these moments of just startling vulnerability that the character will have and humanity that comes through. I also just want to say she has my favorite line read of the whole game, which is, it's a recurring one that she will do where it's Easel. There's something about that. Whenever Morgana will go Easel, I have to like stop and re-listen to it, even though it comes up like every other day in the game. I can't. I want that as my ringtone. It's so good.
Yeah, and she definitely makes the running joke of people calling Morgana a cat and then Morgana denying it. With like lots of like weird variations where Morgana eventually starts like subconsciously accepting that he's a cat, but then like realizes like no, and then saying what the line is in Japanese, which is Neko Janeshi. It's just like I'm not a fucking cat. If I was doing the translation, I would put a fucking in there. That like. Even that running joke never gets old because her line reads are always so fucking good.
So fucking good. And we can't forget that in Japanese there's this extra element that it's not in English because it can't be in English, which is that Morgana uses this first person pronoun wagahai, which comes from the famous Japanese book I Am a Cat. You explain that somewhere in all the original Persona 5 content. You go into a whole explanation of that. But if you have not heard Ikue Otani making a fucking meal out of every time she says wagahai, you need to go find some clips, because it's something that I do not blame the dub for not having a replacement for it, because it's such a Japanese thing. But like, it's part of the reason why you want to listen to this in Japanese, because that wagahai does so much for the character.
Yeah, it's one of the things that separates out the character and makes the character sort of mascotty and otherworldly. They have this weird, which is like the typical in Japanese stuff, of like they have this weird kind of like verbal tick of, in this case, like a very like archaic way of speaking with like wagahai. The long and short of it is just like, it is a archaic way of putting oneself above others, and referring to yourself as wagahai makes yourself seem like you're putting yourself higher in the social standing and the social order, which is a big part of Morgana's character, is that he's very insistent upon being the leader and on being the one on top that knows the best, and that's one of the reasons why Morgana uses that as their personal pronoun, is because it does that, like sort of like linguistically and grammatically establishes or attempts to establish their like primacy in the social order, even though one of the main tensions in the story is that most of the other characters, particularly Ryuji, doesn't see Morgana that way. That's like one of the main tensions, and it's like established linguistically by the way the characters talk.
And there's so many cool Japanese tics Morgana has. Like they translate how he talks to Anne as Lady Anne in English, which is a perfectly fine translation. But there's something about him always saying Andono that is like really cute.
Yeah, like he's a fucking samurai or some shit.
I know.
It's so good.
It's so good. And Sean, if you've listened to any amount of anime in Japanese, you've heard various characters have their silly like catchphrase word that they will have in there. Like obviously Teddy in Persona 4 has the Nekuba he always says at the end of sentences, right? But that's Kappe Yamaguchi. Delightful performance.
Yes.
A little grating if you listen to too much of it all at once. But like, I do think the wagahai and the other tics Morgana has is the best version of that archetype I've ever heard.
Yeah, because I mean, this is one of the things that is, I think, that balance of the character is that Morgana doesn't have what is called a gobi, right? So the gobi is that thing of where it comes at the end of the Japanese sentence. And so that's like Kuma or Teddy in Persona 4 has Kuma as their gobi. And it would be normal for a cat character like Morgana to have their gobi be some form of like nya, which is basically the onomatopoeia for meow in Japanese. But I think the choice to not do that and instead have the verbal tick be more the personal pronoun makes the character like the character believes themselves to be very dramatic and very serious, right?
Yes.
And so Morgana wouldn't use it, and where Morgana sometimes slips into using nya in their speech, Like it's when Morgana's sort of like character breaks a little bit and their facade breaks down, and they're being, Morgana's like belly is being rubbed or something like that, and they come up a little cat-like. And I think that's another thing where it's just like the writing for the character in Japanese is very precise, and like how they use those two elements of like how would a generic mascot version of this character talk, and how does Morgana actually want to talk is written into the character's sort of personality.
Absolutely. One other thing to say about Otani, and I will just remind everyone this is a spoiler cast, so we're going to bring in stuff from all over the game whenever the hell we want. The end of Persona 5 Royal is a plot point where everyone is living their dream, and you have human Morgana. Ikue Otani voicing human, hot, pretty boy Morgana is the funniest, craziest thing. The way she makes her voice kind of husky is crazy to me. It reminds me of any time Masako Nozawa plays an evil Goku, like in Tree of Might or Goku Black or any of those, and she gets kind of husky, and you're like, I don't know what I'm feeling right now. That's the Morgana one, and it's insane.
Yeah, and particularly that is like the way they introduce that like weird sort of fucked up dream reality that the world is becoming in the final part of the game is this like, because it's like, it's the classic JRPG thing of the name in the text box being like question mark because you don't know what the fuck's going on, and you're like, what is happening? And then you hear like one or two sentences, you're like, oh my god, is that Morgana? What the fuck? That is a great like piece of the performance, and especially is like the most like notable big new thing for Morgana. It is like it feels like Ikue Otani is having a great time playing it, right? That's one of those where you can just feel like the voice actor is smiling through every single line delivery because it's such a fun, like silly thing to be able to play. Is like sexy Bishonen Morgana. That's some really good shit.
It's so good. My brother told me he's only ever played the game in English, and I have been trying to find if this is true, and I can't. Oh, no, I have found. Okay. In English, they don't do that. They don't have Cassandra Lee Morris do human Morgana. It's an actor named Bryce Papenbrook. What? How do you fuck that up? Because Cassandra Lee Morris is great as Morgana, and I fully believe she could do that. Why would you do that? That's how the same way they fuck up Igor in English, where they don't have the like original English Igor come in at the end. They just have some random guy. It's like, how do you fuck that up? That's such a weird choice.
Yeah, that feels like it's part of like I think a long-standing bias in Western voice acting of not having women play adult men characters, or like even like adolescent men characters, right? I think it's like one of those reasons why for Japanese audience it's utterly trivial to accept Masako Nozawa playing Goku, like adult Goku, and it's like it's a difficult like bias to overcome if you don't know that, right? And it's like a lot harder to accept that because we just don't have a tradition of it over here.
Yeah, I mean, it's because like you're right, Ikue Otani is having a fucking ball with it, but also it's supposed to sound a little weird because it's the cat who became human, and he's not just human, he's like, as you say, the like shonen like love interest boy. It's so great. Anyway, great. Number one. My number two on my little top five was Mamoru Miyano. I think of the main party who's not Morgana, this is the performance that hit me the hardest because I know Miyano really well. I've heard him as the lead in several of my favorite shows, including Death Note and Gundam 00. And those are two examples of, I think, the Miyano most people know. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, yeah. That's the kind of character he usually plays. Is like he very much plays the Bishonen, like kind of troubled, usually like fairly intellectual character. Like not to say like Sess is not super intellectual, but it's like more in that register.
He's very thoughtful.
Yes, very thoughtful. And Yuji is none of those things. Yuji is not a Bishonen intellectual, like, like internally, like deeply conflicted person, I mean, he has his internal conflicts, but not in the sort of like dramatic or theatrical way we usually think of those things as they're expressed by Light in Setsuna.
Yes. And this performance through all 120 hours of Persona 5 Royal is a journey that keeps unfolding new layers. And I think it makes it one of the best performances I've ever heard in any medium. Live action, animation, voiceover, non-voiceover. It's truly incredible. And, if you listen to some of our Weekly Stuff podcast segments where, Sean, you and I have talked about this game kind of on and off in the Stuff segment,
Yeah.
you'll hear me, when I was playing the early parts of Persona 5 Royal, commenting on how surprised I was at how quiet Miyano plays Ryuji at the beginning. And I think if you've not played Persona 5 in a while, you might go, what do you mean Miyano plays a quiet Ryuji? Because in the scope of the game, it's a very loud, big, boisterous performance in places. But it's true that at the beginning, before he knows you and other characters, he can be very reserved. And even later on in the game, he has this quiet register. And then, of course, he also has this big, boisterous, ridiculous register that's extremely funny. And he'll have all these kind of gag moments. And in between are just all these layers of pretty complex but also very relatable teenage boy humanity. And I think the quality of the performance underlined to me what a great character Ryuji is, who is roughly in the archetypal spot that Junpei inhabits in Persona 3 and Yosuke inhabits in Persona 4. But I think he is a richer character than either of those. And I love my boy Junpei, don't get me wrong, but I think Ryuji just has so much interesting stuff going on, and I think in the new stuff for Royal, in the last third, they give him some key moments that I think understands that he's the first guy on the team alongside the main character for more reasons than just that archetypal spot. He is someone who, despite being kind of a dummy, is so emotionally intelligent, and there's something real going on there. And there's some moments he has in the final couple hours of this game that brought me to tears. It's a stunning, stunning, stunning performance.
Yeah, this is the one that I think the most when I sometimes see people online talking about the game, and if they talk about Ryuji and they play the English dub, I sometimes feel like people are talking about a different character, because I think it's just something of where Miyano's performance is so interesting and so unique for all the reasons you're laying out of there's a real kindness deep in his core that he has.
Yes.
He's such a fundamentally good, nice person that he has been so hurt in his life that he has put on the affectations of the juvenile delinquent, right? So that's part of the way the character talks, and him having bleached hair and all that kind of stuff are all these signifiers of him being the sort of standard school delinquent character with a heart of gold. That is sort of the archetype he fits in. But it's how much I think the game understands a lot of those things to be intentional affectations that he has put on to protect himself because of how much he has been hurt. Is just such a part of the character I love, and it comes through in Miyano's performance because I think this is the most canny piece of casting. This is the one that you just wouldn't expect it looking at the character design and seeing some of the characters' lines, and then knowing Miyano Mamoru's other roles and the kind of thing he usually plays. This is where I think whoever cast the game had such a good eye for seeing that a lot of these sort of emotional qualities for a lot of the characters that Miyano does play and can play very well, where not so much light, but a lot of his other characters Setsuna have a real humanity and a warmth deep down inside, and that's one of the things where Miyano has a very calming, gentle quality to his voice, which he uses in his role as light to sort of put off people. But here with Ryuji using that to sort of play to the core of who he is in his real sort of gentle humanity, it makes for such a warm, interesting performance. And then also for the character that Ryuji is the one who goes through the most dramatic character arc in the game, right? He is the guy who creates. He is both one of the founding members of the team, but he's also the character who creates the most drama and conflict and tension internally within the team in its middle section, where the team pseudo breaks up with Morgana leaving, because Ryuji is so passionate and so driven by his emotions and his desire to do good in the world that he loses sight of these other things that are coming along with that, which is this need to be approved and loved by people, because he feels like he is starved of that approval and love, because we have seen that in his relationships at the school. That just really sort of human, very teenager adolescent character arc is played so beautifully through this character, this is definitely one of the best performances in the game and in any game. It's my favorite version of this character archetype, and this is a character archetype that Persona whatever, it exists in
I know, yeah.
Like
It's
90% of Japanese media, anything that is set in a high school, like a contemporary high school in Japanese media, is going to have a Ryuji-esque character, and this is the one that I think like nails like why that kind of trope is very appealing, and then also I think the like real human truth that underlays like why like the real kinds of people that inspire the archetype in fiction, like where that comes from and oftentimes who those people really are.
I agree. I think you're absolutely right about that. It's incredible. My number 3 was Shuichi Ikeda as Shido. I don't know. What do you say? It's Shuichi Ikeda. You know, obviously 5 years ago when we first played Persona 5, I wouldn't have known because I hadn't watched Gundam yet. You had gotten into Gundam, but you didn't do a Gundam podcast yet.
No.
Now we have done 40-some episodes of Weekly Suit Gundam, and we know Shuichi Ikeda's Char very well. We have spent literal dozens of hours talking about his work. And Shido, that man, he is a Char.
Yes.
And what I love is that, like, we make that joke. Shido is not a Char because he is necessarily that similar to Char as a character. Like, he is much more over-the-top evil than Char is. He is much more well, I don't know if he's more self-centered. Char is a pretty self-centered character, but you know what I mean. Like Char at least has, like, a thoughtfulness about, like, what he's doing in Char's counterattack is on some level out of a belief for the good of humanity. Shido does not have that bone in his body. He's a bastard. But what they do is the writing of Shido is in the style of the writing of Char Aznable. It is the kind of inflections and vocal qualities that only Shuichi Ikeda truly can deliver. And then they bring him into the studio and just tell him, go to town, give us all a lesson on acting. And he does for many hours in this game, to the point where I would just constantly be stopping in the log to re-listen to Ikeda lines clean without music or anything. And it is just one of the best examples in any mediums I've ever heard of like a storied, older, legendary actor coming in and taking everyone to school.
Yeah, it's like I really should go back and listen to the segment in our original podcast where we talk about Shido, because I remember that being one of the first times I ever actually talked about Gundam stuff on the podcast. So I think that would have been after I talked about Gundam Breaker 3. Which was like my big Gundam coming out moment on the podcast, being like, oh, and by the way, over the past year, I've watched like 1,000 episodes of this weird mecha anime franchise. But that was where like trying to sort of like convey and explain like why this is so unbelievably cool to someone who doesn't know a Char from an Amuro. Is like, you know, I bet it is probably pretty funny to listen to that and then just listen to a random conversation from a Weekly Suit Gundam, like, and listen to those back to back of like how far our relationship with Char and Shuichi Ikeda has come, because it is such a really fun piece of casting and a very knowing piece of casting that obviously is like, you know, I have sympathy for the English localization team of like, there's really nothing you can do to try to translate any of that without changing the character, because you would need to find an equivalent like Darth Vader or something, like equivalent villain that is so popular and so well known in English language media. To communicate like the like symbolic archetypal thing that they use Shuichi Ikeda and this like Char adjacent performance that is also, he is styled after Char in his own like cognitive world or whatever when he turns into his boss form, that it's such an intentional use of that symbology that would be, whether or not the person has seen actual Gundam, they would still recognize it if you're in Japan, because that's how much Char as a character is like proliferated throughout media and references and advertisements and things like that, and references and impersonations on TV shows and things. That it's just a ubiquitous thing that they can pull on to use for this character.
What's funny is, so I did a little Twitter thread about this a couple days ago where I was saying I do think one of the places where the dub falls down is on Shido, because I think it's a fairly unremarkable voice. And one person pointed out, like, man, they should have just gotten whoever does Char in English. And then I looked it up. They actually did. I didn't know this until I looked it up. The voice of Shido in English is Keith Silverstein, who has done Char in... he's basically the new, like, kind of official voice of Char for the last 10 years. He was originally the voice of Full Frontal in Unicorn. Then he did Char in The Origin, and now he's done Char in some other stuff. So he's effectively the modern English voice of Char. And I have not watched any of those dubs enough to really have an opinion on that performance. When I go look at it, I'm not that impressed. But I think part of that is because Char is very hard to get in English language writing. But whatever the case, I found it to be a fairly unremarkable performance in English, and my suggestion was, I think the only way this could work in English is if you did it, if you got a similarly big voice that like English video game players would get, like my suggestion was, I think if you were to do this right, I would get Nolan North and I would have him do a very cocky performance. And I feel like that would capture something that the Japanese is getting for an English language audience. But that's the closest I could think to like doing that right. And also they wouldn't be able to afford Nolan North if they tried to do that, because Atlus doesn't really get actors that, not always that big. Sometimes they'll get a Troy Baker for a couple of games and then he will graduate out of the Atlus paycheck.
They got Troy Baker before Troy Baker was Troy Baker, right? They got him when his main job was doing English language anime dubs, and not doing like full mocap performances in $200 million video games, you know?
Right. Yeah. So anyway, that's my number 3. And again, it speaks to how fucking good this cast is that he wasn't like my number 1 or 2.
Yeah. One thing on Shuichi Keita is my actual favorite bit of acting of his is his first appearance in the game, where he's drunk? In the flashback where he's like the drunk, weird old man who you have no idea who he is, and it's like he's so effective at disguising his voice while still being the character, right? But like I remember the first time I played the game, I did not notice at all, even though, I mean, the first time I played the game, I had probably watched Unicorn Gundam, like, a couple of weeks before, you know, like, it came out October 2016. I was, like, finishing up watching through the Gundam series when I was playing Persona 5. So it's like, I was, like, deep in the shit when I was playing that game originally, and I didn't notice it the first time his scene came up, because, like, sloshed up, drunk Shuichi Keita, and I feel like he's very intentionally doing a little bit extra with his voice on top of just acting drunk to disguise it even more, so that way when you hear him at the elevator later, like, it's this moment of, like, oh, wait, what the fuck? That's Char? Like, what the shit? And then the main character having to try to slowly piece together that this is the same guy that he ran into in that dark alleyway and all that. Like, that is, like, a really great piece of acting that also just, like, drunk off his ass Shuichi Keita is a very, like, fun, good performance.
So here's my number 4, that I think would be different if I had only played Persona 5 Vanilla in Japanese, but I did play the Royal, and this is going to be a major source of conversation for today's episode, Sean. My number 4 was Soichiro Hoshi as Akechi.
Oh, yeah.
Akechi is the best thing about Persona 5 Royal, to me. I think all the expansions and reworkings they do with Akechi, because Akechi is the most notable weak point of Persona 5 Vanilla, which is, we talk about it at length. I don't think either of us disliked it, but I think we both kind of agreed it was hard at any point to take seriously the good side of Akechi in Vanilla Persona 3 or 5, because he's just the bad guy, and you know he's the bad guy, and because the game has an auto social link and all this stuff, there's no pretensions about that. And then he has this very kind of weird vestigial ending. But they expand Akechi quite significantly. We will talk about all of that later, and I think the work Hoshi does, it's like 7 different performances. And what's so funny is that default Akechi, and we talked about this a lot on the original Persona 5 episodes, I know, Akechi is very clearly a play on Light Yagami. His character design literally looks like Sugumi Oba's art in Death Note. Like, he looks like Light Yagami. He has some of the same speaking patterns. But what I love is that they've got Soichiro Hoshi doing it over here, while Mamoru Miyano is over here as Ryuji. And so his Light Yagami, like, his nice version of his voice is even more of a put-on than what Light Yagami does.
Yeah.
And so he's got this very big put-on silly voice. He's got the crazy evil villain voice when he, you know, kind of breaks down in Shido's palace. And then he's got this, like, kind of combined version of it that you get in all of the January stuff. And, you know, I came out of the Royal with Akechi being one of my favorite Persona characters ever. And I think so much of that is the work Hoshi does. And it's in so many registers, I didn't even notice that this is another Gundam boy. This is the guy who voiced Kira Yamato. To be fair, Kira has probably one of the less remarkable Gundam voices of any of the Gundam boys, because he doesn't talk a lot. But, like, still, I didn't notice that. It's an amazing performance.
Yeah, and that also, like, you know, like, him playing Kira was, like, 10 years before this, so his voice has definitely aged up quite a bit, because he was, like, I think in his early 20s when he played Kira. No, like, Soichiro Hoshi's performance is so good, and the thing that's really interesting about it in Persona 5 Royal is that, like, I think his performance always was really good, but you couldn't always see it because of, like, the weird issues around the writing of the character, kind of the pacing of his story, because there's a lot of line reads that are like the same line reads he did in the original game that play way better to me with the additional narrative context that like kind of like builds like A to B to C. Particularly
Yes.
the scene where he breaks down in Shido's palace. I think like one of the things that like the additional narrative content around him and his like fully redone social link is that it highlights how much that is also a persona, right? Like part of the concept of the character is that he is the other wild card, right? So he is the only other person who has the capacity to have multiple personas at the same time, but he has so squandered that ability that he only actually has two. The one persona that is his like the mask he wears to look good, and that's the Robin Hood one, and then he's got the other persona, which is the mask that he wears when he's evil, and that's Loki. But like I think the thing with the character is that neither of those are like the real one. And you never really get to, I think, get a sense of who Akechi Goto really is in the base game because there aren't enough scenes with him. Whereas in Persona 5 The Royal, you both have the social link where there are multiple moments where he's wearing the good mask and he's playing good guy Akechi with the protagonist, but he lets that guard down a little bit and you get to see into who he is. And then, of course, like the big thing is in the January section, you get this like really great growly sarcastic angry version of the character, but that's not explosive, which is what his kind of mental breakdown is this big explosive performance, but this much more subdued and quietly vicious version of the character that is him totally without his mask on when he's with the protagonist of the January section is such a good performance, and it's so cool to see that performance get full rounded in this like thing that was cool in the base game but just felt unfinished. Like when it's fully done, it just highlights how good his original work was. It's just the game didn't like kind of live up to the performance he was giving.
Yeah. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that if you have him on your party in January, he has the craziest evil laugh ever when you do attacks, and it's just so great. Whenever he does like a big attack on someone, and like there's that brief period where you have him basically as your guide because Morgana is off being a human in the real world, and he's just saying stuff like, let's tear their limbs off and shit like that, and he's just being super over the top evil, and it's so good.
Yes, yeah, that little touch of them having him be your navigator is really good because it only happens for like maybe like 30 minutes in the game, but it's fucking great.
It's so good. And my note to round out my top five, I could have gone with so many, but I went with Aoi Yuki as Futaba.
Mm-hmm.
What a special performance. Yeah. And I think Erica Lindbeck in the English dub is maybe the best voice in the English dub. Like her and maybe Cassandra Lee Morris are just so good in that. And I think her Futaba is great. But Aoi Yuki, one, sounds more convincingly like a 14-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And two, I think if you've only heard Futaba in English, the way she's written in Japanese is so uniquely Japanese in how she like cuts out things and speaks in very like vestigial sentences, and how she opens up over the course of the game, and how she sounds when she is broken and scared versus when she is enthusiastic and confident. It's a performance of nearly infinite range, and it's also one that will frequently take me aback and like take my breath away and then make me cry a little bit.
Yeah, that's another one where I have a lot of sympathy for the English localization because I think this is a very hard character to translate because it's like you have to try to find equivalent nerdy expressions in English, which is hard in like the way that like internet culture and internet speak and that kind of stuff like manifests is just different between Japanese and English. And so yeah, like Futaba is your hardcore otaku. They call it hikikomori, which is like someone who's like a shut-in, right? She stays in her room, and that's like part of her whole story. But yeah, so Yuki Aoi is an incredible performer because she was a child actress. Because I remember seeing there's like a really adorable clip of her when she's like 10 or something on some like Japanese TV show. It's like, oh yeah, you can see immediately how like talented she was because she's the same age we are. I'm pretty sure. I think she was like born in 92 or 93.
She's born in 92. She's 29. Yeah.
Yeah, so she was a child actress, so she's got a lot of experience. But like, Yuki Aoi is, she was Madoka in Madoka Magica, right? Which is like about like as big a modern like anime of like the past 10 or slightly more than 10 years. So she was the lead in that role. She's like one of my other favorite roles of her is Pascal as or in Nier Automata, which is just a fucking amazing performance. And then she's in so much stuff. There's this show that is like not a particularly great show, but is like a show that is good because she's good in it, which is this like, I don't even know what the title of the show is. It's some like, it's the spider isekai show, where like I reincarnated as a spider, whatever. And I watched a couple of episodes of it thinking like, I'll watch this kind of, that's probably kind of trashy show, and then watch a couple of episodes and fall off of it. And I ended up watching the whole thing entirely because about 90% of the dialogue in that show is just Yuki Aoi's character talking to it herself in like a like very fast-paced internal monologue, and that is entertaining enough in and of itself to make the whole show fun. Because she's just such a really great, interesting performer. And yeah, Futaba, I think the thing with her performance is kind of like with like Miyano Mamoru's Ryuji. There's both the like kind of affectational archetype that the character plays, which is the like otaku girl, and like all the kind of goofy otaku things she says and like the jokes she makes and the references, like sabadada, instead of sadabada, which is like an archaic way of saying goodbye. Like that's what the dragon in Dragon Ball says when he leaves is sadabada, and she does this sort of like almost kind of like dyslexic-y like flipping of the syllables in that word when she says goodbye to people. Like there's just a lot of really big weird quirks in her language, but underneath all that, she's like by far the most like emotionally vulnerable character. And the thing that I really love about her performance is how much Futaba cries in the game, right? Like she's very much a person who feels emotions so strongly that whether it's a sad thing that's happening or a happy thing that's happening, whenever a particularly emotional event happens, one of her major responses is to cry. And like Yuki Aoi's like performance of like acting through this crying, whether it's joyful or sad, I think is like so effective at giving you that sense of how just like raw of a person Futaba is because of how much she was hurt as a kid and bullied and like ostracized because of her talents, and that she's just like a real raw nerve for most of the game, and even when she like grows and like she sort of develops and her relationships with other characters develop, she loses a little bit of that sort of like vulnerability but never loses the emotional quality of the character. And I think like the ability to like turn that thing of like her like emotional sensitivity is not a weakness of the character, it is one of her strengths, and that her becoming stronger is not equated with her like not crying anymore. It's that like crying isn't a way of her escaping from her emotions. She doesn't use it as an excuse to run away. She uses it as a way to sort of like bolster herself and like use her emotions to fight, not like use her emotions to run away from a fight.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sean, those were my top 5. I'd be curious to hear who else would be sort of in your inner circle. I will say my honorable mention for that would be Masane Tsukayama as the warden, the evil Igor, who's just terrifyingly deep voice, is so deep that in English they couldn't find someone that deep and they had to put a filter on the voice, which is disappointing because there's none of that. It's just him talking real deep and it's scary, and I love that voice. But this game is overflowing with good performances, and I'm sure there's other ones you wanted to mention.
Yeah, because I think I would probably generally agree like with that 5 and its ranking more or less. I think for me the other like I would say is like the other best performance in the game would be Nakata Joji as Sojiro, which I think
yeah.
In many ways, I think that that's like the most important performance in the game, because that was the thing that like replaying the game after like 4 years of having not played it, I had forgotten how thick the tone is and how heavy it is early in that game of your character showing up to Tokyo with nothing. Everyone treats you like complete scum because they think you just like assaulted a random person on the street and you're just some fucking delinquent brat kid. And that here's this like weird old dude who seems like he's a womanizer and who like is allowing you to like bunk in the dirty ratty old attic in the coffee shop he runs, because you think like, oh, he's like making some fucking money off of me being here and he barely wants to tolerate my existence, and the school hates that I'm attending there, and the only reason that you even get to go to the school is because they're like using you as a way to like bolster their sort of like political profile of saying, oh, and we help students in need, but they don't actually want to help you. Like it's just the first like 3 to 4 hours of the game are so heavy, and I think the great thing about Nakata Joji's performance as Sojiro is that, early in the game, he has this very hard-ass performance as the character that I think you totally can just buy this is just a weird, skeevy old fucker who's using me to get some money, and that's it. And like the like very hard-edged performance that Nakata Joji's like very deep voice. He's just got one of the best sounding fucking voices in the world. It's so cool.
He very much does, yes.
He lends that character, and that feels like very legitimate. And then he is that socially, because we talked about this in the original Persona 5, because it's true there is here. It's like the one that you're like poking away at for like the whole first half of the game. You're slowly like brewing coffee with him and making curry, and like he's the social like you have to work on day in and day out, like every night to like slowly piece by piece start leveling up until eventually he opens up. There's like a certain point in the story has to happen, and then eventually he like fully opens up. And then his social link kind of proceeds a lot more quickly from that point. And the way that his performance, like, it's not like he's like all of a sudden he's just like the world's most affectionate like surrogate father or anything. He still has this very hard-edged, intense quality to him, but the inflection of it and the little touches, the way that his voice becomes more tinted with affection, more tinted with like admiration and respect for you, and of like acknowledgement that he is too locked up tight and he pushes people away too much because he's so protective of Futaba and that whole situation he's got. It's like the nuance in the performance that he always is that same person, and yet somehow it feels like he has changed completely over the course of the game because he's changed and your perspective of him has changed through your relationship. It was like a thing that was, this is a character I don't think has like, there's a significant amount of new stuff with him in the Royal or anything. It's largely the same character arc and largely the same performance, but it's just like replaying the game highlighted for me again how incredibly good that performance and the writing for that character is, and how like key it is to the whole proceedings of the game.
I couldn't agree more, and I think Nakata Joji, it's one of those performances that has it's a big onion with so many layers in it, and it just keeps unfolding until the end. And I think one of the things Nakata has that maybe is hard to reproduce in English is that he's still got a little bit of that edge to him all the way to the end of the game, which is what makes the amount of love the character has shine through so hard. I look at his little portrait on the side I'm looking at right now, and I can hear his voice coming out of Sojiro. It's so cool. I love that voice. In terms of your main party members, I also just wanted to I could shout out all of them, they're so great, but Tomokazu Sugita as Yusuke is so funny, so great, this big, deep, rich voice of a guy who's fundamentally fairly silly. And I will also, that's one where I will shout out the dub. I think having played both now, I think the voice I think the two voices that capture the Japanese version best are Cassandra Lee Morris's Morgana, and then I would say Matt Mercer doing Yusuke. Matt Mercer's Yusuke is very funny, and I think gets a lot of the same qualities. They sort of, Sugita has this where he talks very kind of prestigiously, in Japanese, where he has, because Yusuke is a fine artist and all of that. And so sort of the way they do that in English is giving him this kind of like almost prissy kind of affect that, kind of, that it's kind of funny. I think it's made a lot of people read like the Yusuke thing is like, if people are like, why isn't there a gay romance in Persona 5? A lot of people think it should be with Yusuke, and I think some of that is how Matt Mercer does it, which is great, and I like that. But yeah, Tomokazu Sugita is so funny and good and great as Yusuke.
Yeah, because Sugita, of course, this is like just like to illustrate like how like good this voice cast is top to bottom. Is like Sugita's his best known role would be Gintoki, the main character in Gintama.
Yes.
He's Kyon, the main character in Suzumiya Haruhi, which is my favorite performance of his. It's so good.
Isn't he also one of the Joestars?
Yes, he's Joseph Joestar from part 2 of the.
Okay.
So he's young Joseph Joestar, because there's a different actor who plays him when he's old, because he's like 80 when he's old. So it makes sense to recast that. Yes, he's that.
But I've never even watched Gintama, but I see clips of it enough on YouTube that I fucking love, and it's such a good to get Gintama to do Yusuke is, one, brilliant, and two, again, shows how deep the cast is, that Gintama is like the fourth party member you get.
Yes. I do want to point out the character's name isn't Gintama.
It's Gintoki. I'm sorry.
It's like calling Goku Dragon Ball. It's very funny.
Okay.
Of course, I understand why, it's a very similar name to the show title.
He is also, Demon Slayer fans are gonna hear a lot of him in the years to come,
Yes.
because he's one of the Hashira. He's Gyomei, who you have not seen much of in the anime so far, but when you do, be glad that Sugita has been cast, because that's a good casting.
That was one of the ones where when I got to his shit near the end of Kimetsu Yaiba in the manga, I'm like, yeah, they made a good choice. Like, I could immediately see how Sugita is gonna do some of those line reads. It's gonna be very good. He's just a great actor.
Yeah.
I think in many ways, and this is not connected to the royal stuff, because again, Yusuke is not one of the characters that has like dramatically new content. It's not like Akechi or anything. But I feel like the 3 times I've played through the game, I feel like my affection for Yusuke as a character has like grown more and more. I think partially like there's something of like Yusuke is, I think, the character amongst the party that like reminds me the most of myself in some ways. Like there's something about his whole fucking weird deal. And I do think one thing that playing the game I thought about a lot this time was there a lot of the English community around the game did have this whole thing of like, why can't the main character romance Yusuke, which like I sympathize with and I agree with that. Like, I think there should be same-sex romances, and I think like the weakness of the modern Persona games is that they're so heteronormative. But I've always thought that read for Yusuke as a character feels weird. One, and we're going to fucking talk about this shit, is you've got Akechi right here.
Yep.
Which, like, even in the sort of more limited version of the character, the base game, the Japanese audience very quickly latched onto what is the one true ship in Persona 5. Because one of the reasons why Akechi's role is so expanded is partially because, like, that pairing is so extremely popular in the Japanese fan base. The Fujoshi or the Japanese like female otaku, they are not going to be quiet and they need to be appeased, and so that is where some of the Akechi stuff comes from very rightly. But like with Yusuke, I think this is where like I feel like I think I fully just read the character. I think this is fairly intentional as being asexual, right? Like not in the sense of like you don't like in Japanese you don't really have like that specific terminology, but the conception of like, I just don't think he like feels sexual desire for people and doesn't understand it. And I think that's where I've seen like interpretations of some of the stuff with An as the model that always has felt to me slightly off base, because I think that there are people who think this like Yusuke is like using that in some way to like get some sort of like sexual satisfaction or something, where it's like the whole point is that like he doesn't fully understand why this is seen as like a weird or awkward thing, because he doesn't see it as something that's sexual, because he's just interested in desire and beauty and sex, and those things are entirely an abstract concept to him as a character and as an artist. And that's the stuff that I think like is a very subtle element of the character, or more subtle element of the character, that each time I've played the game now, I've like appreciated that more and more of, I think, what they're going for with like the slight like awkwardness of him and where that comes from, and the reasons why he's pursuing art and the reasons why he's so different from everybody else in the cast.
Yes, and I actually agree 100%. I think if you've only played Persona 5 in English, I can understand the Yusuke is gay idea, because I do think that is how and this is a frequent thing, the way they take his Japanese affectation and adapt it to English becomes kind of like fussy and like, kind of extravagant in these ways that are often queer coded in English language media. But I think when you play it in Japanese, I 100%, Sean, my read on him was the same. Like, this guy is ace. This is like, I think it's the way Sugita is playing it. I think it's the way he's written. I think his whole interactions with An in that section, the whole joke, and I think it comes through even clearer in Japanese, is he doesn't understand why it would be offensive, because it's not a sexual thing. He's like, you have a great body for art, right? Yeah. Like, and he's like, why would you not be like over the moon, complimented by that, right? And so he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand it. And I think some of that can come across differently in English, and it's because, that way of speaking is not coded the same way in Japanese. Sometimes it can be, but it's not. I don't think it is in this case. Yeah,
because there are ways that if you wanted to code the character as being queer, like there are lots of ways to do that in Japanese, and like none of them are used. Like the character's not coded as gay in any way in the Japanese version.
No. And yeah, I think that's absolutely. Whereas Akechi.
Yes.
Sean, I gotta tell you something. We'll talk about this more later. My brother has been making fun of me for weeks because he's a prude, and whenever I ship someone, he's like, you're just reading into it. I'm not reading into it. The Akechi stuff could not be more obvious. They are the one true romantic pairing of this game. I know you've got like 11 girlfriends, but the game tells you very clearly who Ren's soulmate is. It is Akechi Goro.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll read out what the lyrics of the end credit song to this game are, and it could not be any more fucking explicit what they're doing if you look at the lyrics. We can't spend the whole podcast on it, but I do want to hit the other major performers just to because they all deserve their due, because there's, the thing with the cast is everybody is a hard hitter, like everyone does great shit. So some of the other, major cast members, you've got Takamaki An, voiced by Mizuki Nana. Mizuki Nana is probably best known to the Western audience and to me as Hinata, Naruto's love interest in the Naruto series. But she's probably best known in Japan, actually, as she's the main character in a bunch of Mahou Shoujo or like magical girl series. Like she's one of the main characters in one of the Pretty Cure shows. I think she's in, it's like Lyrical Nanoha, something like that. That's one of the other things that she's really big in. I haven't watched those shows, so I can't speak to those. But that's again, she's a lead character, lead of a show level performer. And her role is on, I've always loved. I love her her English language stuff as On, because the conception is that
it's
On
so
is,
good,
right, half Japanese, half I think American is what's supposed to be. And Mizuki Nana, it's pretty, it's good. I think I totally buy it as someone who's way more proficient at English than basically anyone else at her school, but she's not a native English speaker. And obviously Mizuki Nana isn't a native English speaker in real life, but she is very proficient in English. And I think she dials in that aspect of the character incredibly well. One of my favorite performances in the game is Makoto, played by Sato Dina. She is Railgun in a certain scientific Railgun, or Misaka is the character's name, which that is a show I think I've brought up recently because it's directed by the same guy who did Iron-Blooded Orphans in the Super Peace Busters stuff. But she's a great performer, and recently I've been hearing so much of her voice because she's Eula in Genshin Impact, who's probably my second favorite character in that game. It is the main damage dealer in my favorite team in that game, which is my Eula Raiden Shogun team. And Rina Sato's just such a incredibly kind voice that but also has this real strength underneath it, which is something she has in all the big roles I've seen her in that she plays. And that's something that she uses incredibly well as Makoto. And Makoto is my if you have to have a straight pairing in Persona 5, it is definitely, for me, it would be Rin and Makoto. She's the one that I like the most, and so my audience insert character, I would go for Makoto personally because she's fucking cool as shit.
I'm a Haru kind of guy, but I do not Makoto. I 100% understand. But yes, great performance.
Yeah. There are a couple of really good lines that they do. It's both in this, and they also do it in Persona 5 Strikers, where they make fun of her. One of the things she says if you do the all-out attack with her, which is Tekken Seisai, which means Iron Fist of Justice. And there's one of those phone conversations that they've added in at the end of Social Link events where I forget what she's asking you, but it's something of what should I do to that scumbag boyfriend my new friend has, and one of the possible responses to that is just Tekken Seisai, which they do well in English, where I think they put an exclamation point at the end of each Iron exclamation point Fist of Justice, and just do that for each of them. And
yes,
I love that, and I love that character. Her fucking crazy judo shit. So Haru, the one that you said, that's Haruka Tomatsu, who her best known role by far would be Asuna, the female lead of Sword Art Online, who's probably the best character in that show. She's really, the best part of that show is the 5 or 6 episode arc where she leads it entirely. I think it's the Mother's Rosaria arc is really good. She's a great performer, and one of my favorite things about Persona 5 The Royal is I think Haru is one of the characters that gets improved the most by the fact that she just gets to be around for a lot more, because in the base game she's the last party member you get, so there's only 2 dungeons after you get her in your party. So it's she's such a cool character that just feels it's a shame that there's not a huge amount of game left once you get her, and so just having more time with the character definitely like is a nice bonus for Persona 5 The Royal. Not to say that she was like vestigial in the original game, but it's just the character that I think that is most benefited by there just being more time that you can play with her.
And I felt identically as I did 5 years ago playing this in English, that my future headcanon, if you go with a straight reading, is that Ren, the main, that's the canonical name of the protagonist, so Ren Amamiya, that's what I'm going to call him just because it's who he is in my head, is that Ren and Haru eventually get married and have a cafe together like Sojiro, and they make coffee and they're happy, and sometimes they go do fun crimes. I don't know, but that has always been how I felt like that's the soulmate on the team for him, and for me, and it's Haru, and I love her.
Yeah, she definitely has one of my favorite social links, like all the stuff with her, like coming to terms with the death of her father, this like weird fiance dude, the coffee shop stuff. I love her whole thing of growing weird, like magic fruit shit, like tomatoes and shit that give you magic power on the ceiling. Like those are really good tomatoes because they let me use magic Persona shit somehow when I eat them. They're
of the main party members, and I guess it depends on how you count Akechi, but of the non-Akechi main party members, she has my favorite social link. I especially of the original like crew. I love her confidant.
Yeah, and she's got her first persona in particular is one of my favorites, Milady, which has like the dress that opens up and has like a billion guns inside of it, is a really good just like visual metaphor.
And looks like a Day of the Dead skull or something. It's like very cool. Yeah.
That one's very good. Yeah. Then the new main character added is Yoshizawa. I'm going to just refer to her as that for now. Yoshizawa, played by Amamiya Sora, who she's my favorite thing is she's Aqua in a show called Konosuba, which is a comedy show. So it's a very different performance, but she's incredibly funny in that. She's been in a lot of stuff. Recently, she was in a show I watched that I thought was an okay show, but she's really good. Is a show called Rent a Girlfriend, which is like a high school like romantic comedy kind of show. And she plays the female lead of that show, and it's like the thing that makes the show interesting is her character, who is the eponymous Rent a Girlfriend, who will be your girlfriend for a day, like not in a sexual way, but just say like, oh, let's go on a date and hold hands and like, I'll be very nice to you. And then she like ends up moving in next to a guy who had rented her and gets involved in a way in his life, and she just like wants the fuck out of it. And it's a really good performance, and that character reminds me a bit of some of her stuff she does as the Sumire version of Yoshizawa. But this is of course like is a very complicated character because she's got the two sort of personalities, Kasumi and Sumire. And the thing I really like, and I think the thing that's smart about Amamiya Sora's casting, is that she's a very good actress, but she also doesn't have like a very distinctive sounding voice, if that makes sense. Like it's not like I have a hard time identifying her if she's in a show because her voice doesn't stand out, but her performance is really good. And I feel like that is like probably one of the reasons why they cast her as Yoshizawa, is like she just sounds like a normal person. And that kind of like sense of Yoshizawa having this kind of like fragmented or lost identity that she's struggling to be who she wants to be and is so lost in herself. I think that like Amamiya Sora's performance like really pulls that out really well.
We will obviously spend a lot of this podcast talking about Yoshizawa. It's a great character. If she wasn't, the royal wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And, I definitely spent a little bit of time being nervous because the game very clearly signals there's more to Yoshizawa than meets the eye. They start you out with half a social link. It's very weird, right? And I was slightly worried, is this going to be another, this is a girl who has a god inside her or something crazy like that, which works with Marie, but, Persona does that a lot, especially in the spin-offs and stuff, and like, no, she's actually an intensely just normal person. And I think Amamiya Sora's performance underlines that, and it's a great character creation.
Yeah. And then two other ones we need to shout out from our more supporting cast. One I just want to mention because I fucking love her voice so much is Yuko Kaida, who plays Sai, Makoto's older sister. One thing that was very fun about this is the game I played before playing Persona 5 The Royal was Lost Judgment, the sequel to Judgment, and so in Judgment and Lost Judgment, one of the main supporting characters is a character named Saudi, also voiced by Yuka Kaida, and Saudi is a defense attorney that is working at the old law office that the main character worked at. And so playing two games with like hard-ass lawyers voiced by Yuka Kaida was very funny, and both of them being Sega games. So like in my like internal headcanon, I believe that after the events of Persona 5, where at the end of Persona 5, Sai decides not to be a prosecutor anymore and become a defense attorney, that I think that she ends up like changing her name for some scandalous reasons and ends up through a process at the Ginda law office as Saudi, and that Judgment and that the Judgment series and Persona actually exist in the same universe, and it's my grand Nijima Sai theory of the Persona Judgment continuity, and you can see it on my WordPress blog over here. I'll put the link in the description.
Excellent. Can I also shout out Hisao Egawa plays Iwai, the gun shop owner.
Okay, yeah.
That is a wonderful voice. Egawa is a guy who usually plays like heavies. If you go through his roles, it's often like sort of supporting heavy performances. But I thought for a couple of lines when he was introduced that it was Kazuya Nakai, who is obviously Zoro in One Piece. He's Jin in Ghost of Tsushima. And, like, it's a very Kazuya Nakai kind of role. And obviously, Egawa is his own actor and brings his own spin on it. But there's a vocal quality to that one that of all the, like, random sort of in-the-world confidants, I adored any time we got to hear his voice.
Yeah, that's the character that, like, Sega owning both Persona through Atlus and then also making the Yakuza games is the most, like, especially after Persona 5 music ended up in Yakuza 7 as like a special bonus unlockable. I really wish that EY showed up because he is a Yakuza guy. Hisao Egawa voiced Sohei Dojima, who is the leader of the Dojima clan in Yakuza 0 and Yakuza 1. Who is a character that isn't in the series that much outside of Yakuza 0, but is one of the most important characters because his death is the inciting incident of the first game. And yeah, that is a very good performance. But the other really big performance of this game is, of course, our boy Rengoku himself, Satoshi Hino, who plays Maruki Sensei, the psychiatrist, the counselor Arcana, who is the character that like is the one of the three characters that is sort of like he's the second new character introduced, and he's one of the three characters, if you include Akechi, that like this updated version is basically about. And that is a fucking absolutely killer performance.
It's a real journey of a character.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good time, Sean, to transition from our first hour and 15 minutes of this podcast, where we really haven't talked about the Royal at all. Should we talk about Persona 5, the Royal, specifically?
Yeah, let's talk about what's all the like big new shit going on in this game.
I think let's save the narrative stuff, and let's just start by talking about mechanically some of the various things that have been added and how they affect the game, Sean.
Okay. You're gonna have to help me on that a little bit, because it's now been like 4 or 5 months since I played the game, and I don't remember, because in my head at a certain point it's like, this is just the way Persona 5 always was. Like, it definitely has a lot of small improvements throughout the whole thing, but at a certain point it just is that thing where like it all blends together, and eventually it's like, wait, you telling me that like ammo didn't work this way? I no longer remember how ammo originally worked. I just remember that it's different than how it worked in Persona 5 the Royal.
I had to ask my brother a lot, because my brother has played between the vanilla and Royal. He's played this game 4 times. He's played each of them twice, so he knows these games very, very well. And yeah, I often had to ask him, like, what's new? So here, I just got a list in front of me. So let's talk about the palaces. Inside the palaces, you have, you mentioned it, the guns. They've completely reworked how the guns work. So in the original game, how it was, my brother had to explain this to me because I'd completely forgotten. And then I remembered that the guns, I think, are one of the weaker, more vestigial parts of vanilla Persona 5, because the ammo was per entry into the dungeon, not per battle. So they were effectively useless, except for like the very specific times you had to use them. But now you have the ammo refills on every battle, so every battle you can go to town with the guns if you want, up to a degree. And they became a really key part of my strategy, in part because it's so much more fun to pull out a gun and shoot things than it is to hit them with a sword. I'm sorry, just like in a JRPG, it is fun to take out, and some people have crazy guns, like, Haru has a fucking RPG or a grenade launcher, and, Makoto has a fucking, like, Clint Eastwood pistol, like Magnum kind of thing. They're all so silly. And so you can just shoot to your heart's content. That is honestly, in terms of gameplay changes, one of my favorite things.
Yeah, that's definitely one where as you say, the original system was a kind of about like making it a resource management choice for like the long-term entry into the dungeon, like what SP was. But because bullets aren't essential for general fights, like it just ended up with you never using it. So yeah, like that change then allows you to say like, obviously there are some enemies that are still vulnerable to piercing damage and you would want to use bullets for them, but also normal enemies that it's just like, I just need to do physical damage and just do a lot more of it in one turn than just running up and hitting them. It's a good just additional tool to round out your kit. That's like a very smart change.
Absolutely. But it also plays into a bunch of other stuff because, so in the original game, gun damage was one of the weaknesses enemies could have, and it still is. But they've added an entire extra layer onto this game called technicals.
Yes.
And the technicals are really interesting because they relate basically to like the fear, despair, those different kinds of like ailments you can give. Yeah, status effects, or stuff like burns and freeze that you do from doing fire and ice spells, or shock from electricity. And then there's a technical damage that goes off of that. So even if an enemy has no like weaknesses to an element, you can still get them down, and the guns play a big part in the technicals because there is nothing more fun in the battles in this game than to shock someone until they are like shocked and like are electric, and then you pull out a gun and just go to town on them because it does technical damage. That kind of stuff. There's so many little things like that that make the battle system even snappier.
Yeah, and the technical thing is probably the most notable an important change, because I think technicals, because I'm looking it up, technicals did exist in the original Persona 5, but they were very different, because they didn't, one thing that's really critical is they didn't give you one mores, they only did additional damage, and they were way more limited in terms of the different combinations of status effect and attack, and it was mostly connected to nuclear damage and psychic damage, and so I think that's one of the reasons why they brought nuclear and psychic back, which had been absent in 3 and 4, but were in 1 and 2s, is that like they brought it back as this idea around technicals. But it just was like a thing that you could easily play through the entirety of the vanilla Persona 5 and never end up using a technical, and it was never a important strategy. Whereas now it's like, one, it gives you more options in some fights where maybe it might be easier for you to do with a certain party configuration. You might be able to clear this fight by exploiting their weaknesses normally, but maybe if you have a different party configuration, you don't even need to use their weaknesses because you have it set up and you can just use your status ailments and clear the fight that way. And it's just a thing that it makes status ailments an actual like useful, important part of the moveset to like invest in. That particularly some of the enemies, you basically have to use technicals, particularly on the harder difficulties and earlier on if you're not, where you can't be over leveled, or the game is like, you're not going to be able to clear it. And I think that is just like a way to take those status ailment effects that have always been like somewhat useful, but in a very Pokemon-esque way, have never been necessary enough that you're just going to, unless you really care about it a lot, you're never going to do it because you're just going to do the thing that just does damage right now, because while it might not be the technically most efficient way to clear the fight, it is a good enough way to clear the fight. And so then introducing the technical stuff just really rounds out the whole combat design.
And off of the technicals and the baton passes are unchanged. They were always there. Yeah. But they've added the place in Kichijoji where you can play darts and you can play billiards to get your technical damage up and your darts damage, or your baton passes up, which both is fun on its own, but also then encourages you to go use your technicals and baton passes more. And the baton pass is just one of the most, I think, delicious little parts of a JRPG battle system ever. It is so addictively fun to do baton passes and see how many of those you can chain together. And it's one of my complaints with the game overall, is I do think they didn't do enough to ramp up the difficulty for all of the different things they give you. So the later stages of the game, it's actually very hard to even get into a stage where you can use baton passes because you kill stuff so easily. Yeah. But one of the final bosses, the first stage of the Maruki boss at the end, is all built around doing baton passes, and it is one of the most fun bosses in any Persona game because of that. But we should also just talk about how cool the darts and the billiards are.
Yes, yeah. This is like a very Yakuza-esque thing, because it's just like, oh yeah, let's go hang out and let's do darts and billiards, which is a thing that's been in the Yakuza games forever. And it's just a fun, it's a fun thing to just be able to go and hang out with your friends and do that. And especially it's the stuff where it's valuable enough, like the advantages you get from increasing your technical damage, and particularly for the baton pass stuff, which will regenerate HP, it will regenerate SP, and make you do more damage. So it's like, that's really valuable. Those are valuable enough rewards that there's like a good enough reason to go do that instead of doing something to advance your social rank in something right now, which has been always a thing that I think the Persona games have struggled with, which is they have a lot of things, and Persona 5 still, the Royal still has these left over from the original Persona 5, but there's stuff of like going to the gym or in working out or going to the batting center or whatever that can give like it increases your strength by 1 or you get 10 more HP. That's like, it needs to be something where the reward isn't significant or you could completely break the difficulty curve of the game, but it also then it becomes so small that there's really no particular reason to go do it, and it's better just to go do the social links or just go do something goofy that's funnier. Like, even if I don't need it, I'm still going to watch all the DVDs or play all the Famicom games because those are more amusing than going to the gym and getting 10 HP and like 1 SP boost. But this stuff is like, no. And I actually wish I had done it earlier because I didn't understand like that you could get 2 dart rank ups or like boost rank ups from the dart thing in one go if you do it well. That means that's like it doesn't take up, like 14 in-game days or something to get everybody leveled up. I wish I had done them earlier because they are like really useful. And the game gives you more than enough time if you're efficient about it, and especially if you've played the game 2 fucking times before, that you can get all the social links up and still have more than enough time to do that and do some of the other fun stuff in the game, and have a good time with it.
No, totally, and I did do it like as soon as I friggin' could because it was so much fun, and my brother was telling me like, "Don't miss out on those darts, Jonathan. The darts are great." Because my brother has a very like encyclopedic knowledge of the inner workings of the Persona games, and it was very funny about that. I do, Sean, just for a second, I want to say something about the gym because this is very funny. I'll talk about this in a second a little more. I do have a slight complaint about the Royal that I think mostly it's that the battles become too easy, but I also think like you do have the amount of free time. If you're playing it very well and you know what you're doing, you can wind up in those last couple of months with just an overwhelming amount of free time. And there's a couple of things that I think they maybe could have done to address that, like maybe adding an extra rank to all of the social stats or something. Because like I did not wind up having to use most of the DVDs, and I didn't. I think I only played one of the Famicom games this time because I'd played them all before. But I did wind up, because I thought it would be funny and I wanted to see what would happen, I did wind up going to the gym and working out in my room a lot. And I did it so much. The gym has an entire like little quest line within it where you start doing treadmill, then you go to the weightlifting, then you do the like dummy that you fight with, and you become really good at all of them until with the dummy you have your shirt off and you're doing like fucking Bruce Lee moves on it, and it's awesome. And you're getting like pretty big HP boosts, especially if you're taking protein. But basically I started doing that around the point in the game where Ren is believed to be dead, and so you're going around with your hoodie and stuff. And in my head canon, it was that he has to stay out of the limelight, so he's just getting fucking jacked for the confrontation with Shido while everyone thinks he's dead. And Sean, I got so jacked that in the final fight, I was level 99, and Ren had 850 HP. Which is like 300 more than any other party member. He also had like 500 SP. It was just insane. Like I was withstanding attacks that were killing everyone else. It was hilarious. And I did have fun with that. And I did it to the point where I not only did everything in the gym, but I did it so much that then Morgana was like being like, "Why are you still coming here?" Which was very funny.
Very good, yeah. Like in that period, that's where I did I just like sat and watched all the DVDs and I played the Famicom games. And they did add 2 new Famicom games, one of which is actually really cool, called I think it's Featherman Seeker, which is actually like a cool story if you play it. That is very much, it feels like it's legitimately like one of those, here's this weird like Famicom games that only ever came out in Japan, and like it's got this really cool story, but not that many people know about it, but the people who know about it fucking know about it, where the story is like, the Feathermen are the like in-universe Power Rangers, Super Sentai kind of thing. That's like, they've been cameos in all the modern Persona games. And the plot of the game as you play through it is that you play as a character, I think you're like the Dove or something, that you're a trainee for the Featherman men, and you're going on these missions. But like something seems slightly off, and every time you go on like do one of the levels in the game, quote unquote, which is mostly you just reading text. There's not like, I think you mash buttons a little bit, but it's just kind of text stuff. And as you go on missions, it's more and more like, this seems weird. Like, there's something weird about the mentor character, and it's something slightly off. And then the big twist in the game is that you are not actually the dove training to be a Featherman Ranger, but you are one of the monsters made by the villain, who has been trained to be like a sleeper agent, basically, to infiltrate the Feathermen. But the Feathermen discover you, and you then realize that, like, through your training as a Featherman Ranger, even if you were designed as a monster, your like heart of like nobility and justice wins out, and you sacrifice yourself in order to defeat the villain, while the Feathermen escape, never really knowing who this mysterious man called that they encountered, called the Dove, actually was. And it's like, when I hit that end and saw the end of it, I'm like, I was like legitimately touched. It's like, this was a great little story. Like, I really want to actually play this game, because it was like, it's got great music. The track for it is on the soundtrack, and it's my favorite of all like the fake 8-bit songs. And that is, felt like they put their back into Featherman Seeker in a way in Persona 5 Royal that it's way more elaborate than any of the other fake Famicom games in it.
I love all the Featherman mythology in general, and I think the song for that is just the 8-bit version of the... Have you heard the full Featherman theme song that Lynn did that's in the dancing games?
Yes.
Because it's also in Royal, if you put on the Featherman costumes, you can get it as your battle music, which I would do in Mementos sometimes, and it's just so fun. That song is great. I really... If I could just snap my fingers and make something happen, I want the 13-episode Featherman anime. I want them to make that. I want them to use that theme song. The Featherman like mythos is like weirdly rich enough at this point that I really kind of want to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing that they added to battles in this game, Sean, is the Showtime Attacks.
Oh,
the tag team moves that everyone has. That you have all these cutscenes where like two characters like, you know, Haru and Makoto will come together and be like, I have an idea for a move we could do together. And then the star that Jose, the weird boy in Mementos, we'll talk about him later, like shines and you get a Showtime attack. They are so good. There's so many of them and they're all phenomenal. And I feel like every one you unlock is better than the one before, all the way to the end of the game, where I think the best one might be the one Akechi has.
Yes, no, yeah, Akechi and Rins is my favorite of just fucking... All of a sudden you're on some, like, rain-swept ceiling or, like, a rooftop in some, like, noir-ass city, and you just fuck this guy up with it. Yeah, those are great additions. I was very relieved when the game told you this, like, oh, and by the way, you don't have to have both party members in your party at the same time to pull them off. Because that was the thing I was worried about. It's like, oh god, that's going to be tedious to sort of want to see all of them and have to manage your party, like min-max, or like sort of like really sort of heavily manage your party in order to do that. But yes, they're just like really good, fun additions that add an element of sort of like another little random element that can pop up in some battles. They're just, it's basically like the super move in a fighting game. I'm always here for some big, crazy, elaborate animation in my video games. Is like the whole reason why I like the fighting game genre in the first place, is just because I really like big, elaborate super move animations. I
mean, but they're all so good. The first one you unlock is on and Morgana, where she has her flowers, or Morgana has the flowers for On, and she pulls two guns out of them and starts firing. You have the one for, it's Ryuji and Yusuke, who are in a beef bowl shop, and Yusuke makes his perfect beef bowl, and then they attack the guy who comes in. You have Makoto and Haru going into a wrestling ring together. They're all so good. We talked about the Akechi one, which is brilliant. Just, I love that one so much. But I also love the one they add for Yoshizawa and Ren at the end, which I'm pretty sure is an homage to Castle of Cagliostro. It's very like Lupin the Third. Specifically, Castle of Cagliostro is the ending where Lupin comes into the church and like swings around, and they basically have Ren do the same thing, and then she does her big ballet move. And that one is maybe actually even more elaborate than the Akechi one in terms of animation, but they're both so good. And I saw them a lot because obviously I had, you know, Yoshizawa and Akechi on my team for the entire last month, because I don't know why you wouldn't. And it's so good.
Yeah, I think my other one that's probably might be my favorite one is I really love Makoto and Yuji's, but specifically the ending of it, because obviously at a certain point you've seen them so much that you end up skipping them, particularly if you're like grinding Mementos or something. And so it skips to like the last like 3 seconds of it, and that is my favorite one to skip, because it just skips to Makoto with like a grape soda in her hand and she fucking crushes it, and then Ryuji does this full 90-degree bow, like he's like she is his Yakuza boss, basically, is the whole thing,
Yes.
right? Because while she is like the like student council president and like the perfect honor student, she's actually the most badass person in the entire party. So Ryuji's like little juvenile delinquent heart can't help but to like make her his like boss in that sort of like Yakuza-esque way. And that is always makes me laugh whenever I saw it.
They're all so good. I love it. Okay, in the palaces, probably the most notable thing that has been added is your fucking grappling hook, because all games should have grappling hooks. Grappling hooks always make things better.
Yep.
And it's a very fun grappling hook that is used the most in obviously the last palace that is designed from the ground up for the Royal. But they've redesigned all of the palaces to a certain extent, not just for the grappling hook, but just to make them new if you've played the game before. But I think in general, all of the new things the grappling hook opens up are a ton of fun to explore. And like we talked at length in the original Persona 5 podcast about how amazing the dungeons are in this game, and they are still just a bundle of fun to play through, this mixture of exploration and puzzles and battles and all this stuff. And that grapple hook, man, it adds a whole new lease on life to these great dungeons.
Yeah, it's because it's that, and then like usually in the existing dungeons, that is also revolves around the will seeds that they added in, which are like extra kind of collectibles that give you really powerful accessories when you collect all of them. There's 3 of them in each of the dungeons, and that is also like a nice little just sort of complication, another thing to explore, a way to, particularly for returning players, to just flesh out the dungeons more and give you new areas to explore. That I think is fun because it also, you know, if you've played the game and you know the dungeons well, it just gives you an additional complication, particularly in the early dungeons when resource management is way more important, especially if you're trying to max out everything and get all the social links and all that shit, and so you want to make sure you're doing the whole dungeon in one day. Like adding in that extra like, fuck, that's right, I need to fight this little extra mini boss too. Like, can I do it with I remember it being very tense in the Kamoshida Palace when I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting this. I was not planning around fighting this dude too. I've got like 12 SP total across all of my party members. Like, let's go for it. And yes, I like those additions as well.
Yeah, I love the will seeds. And, you know, they're really well placed because they're not necessarily like easy to find in that you're just automatically going to stumble into them, but they're also not obscure and like they're not like frustrating to find. In the whole game, there was only one I ever had to look up, and it was in the first dungeon. It was in Kamoshida's palace, and I wasn't used to how they were all laid out yet. And then I found them all on my own, and that's the mark to me of like a really good collectible, is that they're not like the skulls in Halo or something where you're never going to find them without a guide.
Yeah, because I don't think I had to look any of them up either, because they're it is, you're right, that is the right level of, you do have to pay attention, because if you're just sort of running through the dungeon without thinking about anything, you would walk past them. But also, you don't have to go look up a 13-minute YouTube guide and scroll through for the 30 seconds that are relevant to you, and past the person just talking about whatever the fuck for the first 8 minutes, which is how all those videos are.
Yeah. They also added the rare shadows that are like unstable and have the aura around them, and you have to target them, and if you damage them but don't kill them, they'll damage you. But if you kill them, they explode and take everyone out with them, basically, and drop an item. I like that little wrinkle added to battles.
Yeah, there's lots of little things like that are just like, here's like another kind of pseudo-random element that can pop up that just adds more variety overall to the combat. And those ones are particularly just very satisfying, especially because like the more extra damage you do to the exploding enemy, the more damage their explosion does. So it incentivizes you to take advantage of the technical mechanic, because that's how you do the largest amount of damage, is either through the baton pass system or the technical system, or obviously like combining the both of them is how to get the maximum amount of damage in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really cool. The Velvet Room, depending on how battles go, will go into the fusion alarm thing, which I'm a little of two minds on. I think it's cool, and I think you can do really fun stuff with the fusion alarm, and there's definitely fun stuff that comes out of that. Late in the game, it started to annoy me how much it pops up, because it doesn't take much to trigger a fusion alarm, and at a certain point, I've fused all the personas, I've gotten all the itemizations I need, there's like literally nothing I can do with it, and it would annoy me a little bit how much it popped up. But overall, I did like that system.
Yeah, I mean, it only pops up if it's gone back to its default state, so I think it didn't really annoy me that much, because I just enjoyed particularly if you're someone who wants to min-max your party and that kind of stuff, I did enjoy the like, it adds an additional level of complexity to fusing personas and strategizing around like how you fuse your personas and which ones you're using your fusion alarms on and stuff like that. That just adds a little bit more to do on that side of the game.
Yeah, overall, I definitely liked it for all of that. Finally, then, in terms of this whole side of the game, you have Mementos has been fairly substantially reworked. It's the same areas, it's the same idea, but, I mean, one, they've added new music. So every 2 floors, there's a new track. I love the original Mementos theme, but I think this was a good call, and it's much more now like the, basically like the dungeon in Persona 3, like Tartarus, where it's like the same melody, but it builds in each area, and the music is just really cool, until I think the one you get in the Maruki area at the end of the game, the last Memento stage, is a just killer fucking track, like combining all of it, and that the music edition is huge. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's I think one of my favorite changes to the game, just because while the original Mementos music is good, it is also like that being the only theme that plays for the entirety of Mementos. I definitely started muting the game and listening to like a podcast or something when I was in Mementos when I played it originally, whereas I'm much more inclined to just like groove with that music. It's got a really good bump kind of beat to it that just goes around as you're going through Mementos. And yes, I've always really loved the Tartarus music, and particularly, and this is what this specifically reminded me of, is the Interstice of Time, which is the dungeon music in episode Aegis in Persona 3 Fest, is incredibly good. And this has a similar quality to like how the melodies start to evolve and intertwine in the like subsequent versions. Reminds me specifically of that track, which is one of my favorite, just like put on, because that one is like on the soundtrack, it's a 10-minute long uninterrupted seamless version of all of the versions of the song just kind of cut together, and that is one of my like, I gotta do something like study or whatever, I'm just gonna put that on fucking loop and just let it go and go and go, because it's just very satisfying.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Mementos also now has Jose, a mysterious little boy whose origin is never made completely explicit. And he is looking for flowers, so there are now flowers that you can find while exploring. The flowers you give to him, and he will give you different goods that you can buy from him. But then also, you can find he has set up stamps throughout all of Mementos, and if you get all the stamps, then you can adjust Mementos to give you extra XP and money and all of that, which means you can effectively break the fucking game.
Yeah.
And this is where I do have a complaint with Persona 5 Royal, which is that you don't even have to work that hard at it, and you can over-level really rapidly just through normal play in Mementos. Like, if you just... And I mean normal. Like, not grinding, but I want to get all the stamps. Just the normal play of business. You wind up over-leveling pretty heavily, because they've also... I forget if this was in the original or not, but if you run into an enemy and you're over-leveled, you just bypass the battle and get the XP.
That was in the original.
Okay, so leveling gets really fast. Like, basically, at a certain point, you will never do a battle in Mementos unless you choose to do so, because you can run through all of them and get all the XP, and it becomes very fast. And the problem is, for me, is that the palaces, they don't level scale to you at all or anything like that. So I would say it started for me around the Okamura Palace, and this is where I moved the game from hard to merciless, the max difficulty. And it just becomes, most of the enemies you can also run through if you want. I think the difficulty becomes fairly trivial, and all of the complex interlocking systems that are the hallmark to me of Persona 5's game design matter a lot less later in the game, because the battles become effectively trivialized. And I do wish they had done something to the difficulty, because while I prefer a lot of the systems added in Persona 5 Royal, I think I felt the like ingenuity of the game design more in vanilla Persona 5, because it wasn't so easy to over level everything and make the combat so trivial. And that is my biggest complaint with Persona 5 Royal.
Yeah, I think, because I don't totally disagree with that, but I also think you might be like subconsciously discounting the additive effect that this is the second time you've played the game. Because I will say I felt that way kind of about Persona 5 when I played it the second time, because I knew everything, and it was a lot easier for me to just... Because there's a lot of things of, because I'm assuming you were maxing out every single social link, right? You were as you said, you were like trying to get all the stamps. Like that is a like level of play that is something that you can only really do because you're experienced with this game specifically, and then also like this is like the sixth or seventh time you've played through a Persona game, right? So like I think there's just a certain thing of I wish that these games did have like a better hard, like a better version of a hard difficulty that like that changed that either like made it so that enemies scaled to you, or it was like slightly different enemy configurations that were even harder, whatever it is. Because one of the problems is if you change it to merciless, it almost makes it worse because you then get more XP for winning battles in merciless than you do on hard or normal. So each difficulty jump actually gives you a little bit more XP than the previous difficulty. So it actually makes it easier to over level. And then once you're over leveled, there's no way to like get back down to doing normal fights because you're just out leveled everything, and it doesn't kind of matter how hard the game is. But it definitely is. The game is easier, I would say, overall than base Persona 5. But to me, having played all these, it is not to me as dramatic as I felt the Persona 4, the golden one, was, where that game felt like it fully trivialized the game, like pretty, like even earlier than that. Like I would say, like before the halfway point of Persona 4 the golden, I felt like I had completely trivialized the entire combat experience. And for Persona 5 the Royal, I think it was maybe a little bit earlier than it did in my second playthrough of Persona 5, but kind of around the same point of me being like, okay, I can kind of just run through enemies and not even have to do fights, and stuff like that. It was at that point the game is kind of over in terms of difficulty because there's no means the game has to prevent you from totally over leveling at that point.
Yeah, and I just think that's where I wish they had thought about it a little more. I would be fine with how it works if this was a default difficulty, but I do just wish there was a difficulty setting that's like, hey, I know what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm a Persona vet. Challenge me. I would, if they added that DLC to the game, I would pay for it. That would be a really cool thing. And it's the one thing that I think is substantially missing from the Royal. So there you go. But I will say, all of those additions to Mementos, even though I think they're a little game breaking, they make Mementos really fun and addictive to play.
Yeah, because that's the thing of where, because again, I think like most of the strategies you can use to over level and like that stuff, like all of that just existed in the original game and happened to me in the original game anyways. The thing about this one is that it's more fun to over level, and it's more fun to, right? That's like the thing with the fusion alerts is like, yes, is there no thing in the game that can actually challenge me once I have some of these end level personas and the fucking like get the best weapons in the game by doing the fusion alert and like sacrificing a persona to get like this magic super sword? Yeah, there's nothing in the game, certainly like not unless you're on like a new game plus and doing the secret bosses or something. There's nothing that you actually need to do that with, but at least like there is stuff for you to do to kind of like become even more ridiculously overpowered. Whereas in like original Persona 5, you definitely just like sort of hit a ceiling at which like, well, there's not really anything for me to do because there's no way for me to min-max personas or get like more interesting gear or anything in the way that like you can kind of do that infinitely in Persona 5 Royal with the way some of those systems work.
Yeah, exactly. So I would generally agree with that. And yeah, it is so fun to make some of the end-level personas and just find different ways to fucking kill everything. Yeah. Because you can create some truly crazy personas. I think I created one near the end named Alice, who is a persona who you can get a... this is another thing they added for the personas is you can get like an overall like characteristic. I forget what they call it for the persona that is like a certain power it has. And for Alice, I was able to get it would allow you to do any dark insta kill skill for 0 SP. Nice. And then I got her one that is called, I think it's called like Die Now or something like that, or yes. You all die or something like that. Die
for me, yeah, because that's a reference to the original Shin Megami Tensei game where I think she's the villain of that game.
Yeah, so it's Die for Me, and it is like it's the severe Mudun damage to everyone, and I can do that for 0 SP, and that is like, I was laughing so hard at what a like knowing like winking game break that is. It's so fun. I love that kind of stuff.
Or getting like a persona that has like all this ridiculous counter stuff, and there's one of those traits that's like double the amount of damage that counters do. Because there's definitely a period in the game where like any character that did a physical attack on my main character just basically instantly died, and it made me laugh every single time it happened.
Well, so I platinumed this game on PS4. I'm guessing you did too, because it's a pretty easy platinum to get. It's the first Persona game that you don't have to play twice to platinum, and thank you for that, Atlus. That's nice of you. But I platinumed this game, and one of the trophies you need to do is to kill the Reaper in Mementos. And I had a lot of fun creating the persona I would use to fight the Reaper, and I used a mix of like fusions and then the item cards to make one who was resistant to all types of attacks, and then just fucking kill that thing. That was very satisfying.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I think like this game is just better at doing those things than any of the other Persona games. And that's like it is more fun to be the inevitably overpowered monster you are at the end of one of these games in Persona 5 Royal than it is in the others to me.
I would agree with that 100%. That's very true. So in terms of the daily life stuff, there's I would say less added than on the combat side. I mean, there's the stuff like there's darts and there's Kichijoji and all of that. And a lot of that is attached to some of the new characters that we'll talk about. But they have little things like the confidants now have new dialogue where they will call you after you've hung out with them. That's a really cool addition. Yeah. That's a very above and beyond thing that they didn't have to add. And, you know, there's a couple of those where I would say like, this kind of was like repeated dialogue that I didn't need. I was amazed at how many of them were like actual like substantive new content that followed up on that social link event.
Yeah.
It's really cool. There's a lot of them that are just very good.
Yeah, it's a smart way to like make a spot for them to flesh out those existing social links instead of just having to have all the new additions be battle stuff and then like here's like our segmented out new content, which is kind of how it worked before. Is like, you know, like Persona 4 the Golden, it was everything is the same until here's like this big story little, you know, rock star event or whatever it is they go on. Whereas I like the like it's more piecemeal, but it's evenly distributed throughout the game where every character just gets a little bit more. And I think that that's a cool way to make it just feel satisfying for a returning player that you're kind of constantly running into little new pieces of characterization through that little addition.
Yeah. One of those is that this was one of the coolest additions, I thought, is that they added new character portraits for conversation. Mm-hmm. So Ijima drew new versions of the characters that you would see, and they're in there from the very beginning of the game to the very end. And there's one for Ryuji where he's like looking right at the camera, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's like really happy, and I think that one adds a lot to scenes with Ryuji. But everyone has, I think there's like 2 new character portraits for pretty much everyone who has a character portrait, and that's just one of those like, man, they really know their game and thought about it, and like that's such a cool addition, I think.
Yes, yeah, it's another one of those of where it just adds that little extra spice throughout the whole game, and I just think that's like one of my favorite things about Persona 5 the Royal that's a little bit different than most of the other updated versions they've done. Is it's just every kind of corner you turn, there's just a little tweak, a little addition here or there that just makes everything a little bit richer.
Yes. Is there anything else from just like the daily life or the palaces or those kind of like nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes changes that we should talk about before we get into the big narrative slew of things?
One other thing they added that I liked was there's the challenge battles that you can do. There's not a huge number of them, but I enjoyed that as just a way to, because those are very much designed around you get more points by the amount of damage you do, and so that is where you're kind of solving combat puzzles of it's not just about winning the fight, it's how can you win the fight while doing the greatest amount of damage while also incorporating like, oh, Yusuke damage gets times 2 and gravity based damage gets a times 8 or whatever. And so I enjoyed that, and that's something that I wish there were more of those. Like there's DLC where you can get a little bit more, but I didn't buy it because I looked it up. It just seemed like a lot of money for what are like as a pretty minor addition that is mostly a way to do boss fights with the Persona 3, Persona 4 protagonists, which is fine, but I'd more just kind of skim through a YouTube video to be like, oh, that's cool. But I wish that I hope like whatever the fuck a Persona 6 is going to be, I hope that like this concept is continued on, because I think it's a cool way to really double down on the puzzle-like aspect of the Persona combat, and dial that up to 11 with very heavily designed encounters with specific challenge components put on top of it.
Speaking of Velvet Room stuff, we should not forget that Caroline and Justine basically have a second social link in this game.
Yes.
Where in a move very clearly inspired by Elizabeth's stuff in Persona 3, they will now ask to leave the Velvet Room and go out into the world with you. But of course, being Caroline and Justine, they frame it as part of your rehabilitation and are kind of mean to you out in the world. And so you go to places like the gym and Big Bang Burger and all sorts of the places that you can go in the game, the aquarium, wherever you want to go, and you will have very, very, very funny dialogue from Caroline and Justine. And then at the end of the game, Lavenza has one where she comes to your room and looks at all your stuff. Those are some of the best new stuff in the Royal, I think.
Yeah, I love those so much, and it was just always a joy to see Caroline just hanging outside the Velvet Room door and being like, okay, yes, I can go on another one with them, because it was always just, yeah, it's that very much Elizabeth-esque thing of them just trying to understand what the fuck human culture is, and them understanding everything through like weird, complicated, archaic power relationships and things like that, like it's like feudal era Japan or some shit. Yeah, those were fun. And then in general, the like Lavenza stuff is Lavenza, kind of like Haru, is another character that I think just benefits by the fact that there's just more of the game where she's in it, because in the original game, you know, they fuse into Lavenza when there's only maybe like 5 hours left of original Persona 5. And so just getting to have like more with this sort of fused version of the character, and they get to kind of give her a bit more life and personality because she gets to be there more. That was another thing that I really enjoyed in Persona 5 Royal.
Well, it's that, and she has a more active role in the plot in the January stuff, because she helps you figure out what's going on with Maruki. But then also, you know, it is such a profound joy, that moment when you learn that Igor is not Igor, he's the warden, he's Yaldabaoth, and it's the voice you've been hearing the whole game, but it's not Igor's voice, it's the low, deep, evil voice, and then real Igor comes in, and it's the original Persona voice of Igor in Japanese, going, Yoko sono velveto rumue, and I love that, and because you have January, you now have time to actually go into the Velvet Room and hang out with original Japanese Igor. It put such a smile on my face every time, Sean. It's one of the things they messed up in English, because they didn't do the same kind of effect. And I love it to death. It's so fun.
Yes, yeah. Just all that little, like, just being able to live a little bit in the, like, status quo that changes really rapidly in the lead up to the end of Persona 5 is just very satisfying.
100%. So, in terms of stuff in the palaces, there's a lot of like new little things in the palaces here and there, but there was one I did just want to shout out because it is one of my favorite things in the game, is that the parts where you turn into a mouse in Shido's palace, those are in the original Persona 5. I remember that vividly. But in Persona 5 Royal, they have added extra puzzles, including the cheese that you can find on the ground, and all of the dialogue. I think there's like 4 or 5 different dialogues that'll pop up based on the quality of the cheese you find. That is one of those, like, I love how creative they are, even with little, tiny, seemingly insignificant corners of the game. It's just everywhere.
Yeah. It's just, it's like top to bottom. I mean, it would be impossible to list all of the changes the additions, because they are so thorough. Like, here's like another little tiny one, because I'm looking through a list and I had forgotten about this. I really love that they add an all-out attack animation for Futaba that plays sometimes when your main character does it, which is fun. Just because it's a very fun animation where like the UFO drops a little bomb and her like the end card of it with her like tongue out and her being like blown like Looney Tunes style by an explosion into the screen. It's fantastic. But it's also, I thought that was a very smart change, because you know, at a certain point the protagonist becomes so capable with your personas that you end up seeing the protagonist all-out attack over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, because he's the one who can exploit every weakness in like one turn if you need to. And so just adding in a like 50-50 chance of sometimes it's him and sometimes it's Futaba, like that is like a little thing, or what feels like a little thing, that I thought actually that little tiny piece of variety added a lot to some of the combat in the game, and just getting to see something slightly different from those all-out attacks.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. All right, we're almost 2 hours into this damn podcast. Should we talk about the new story of Persona 5 The Royal?
Yeah, let's talk about what's going on in the story, Jonathan. Where do you want to start with this?
There's a lot.
Yeah.
But so I think the main thing we should talk about is the game makes it actually pretty easy to organize this, because there's 3 major characters who form the crux of the new content of Persona 5 The Royal, and that is Yoshizawa, Dr. Maruki, and Goro Akechi. Akechi obviously is in the original Persona 5, but he has been so significantly reworked, he might as well be a new character here. And then you have the other two. With Akechi, what they've done is they have added an actual social link for him that is not an auto-advance one, but one that you go advance like anyone else's. And all of those scenes are new. His level 9 and 10 still are in the same place as they were before, but the first 8 are original. And then obviously everything with Yoshizawa and Maruki is original. And Maruki is very significant. He comes in after Kamoshida, and he is the counselor at Shujin High School to help all the traumatized students there. And so you have a social link with Maruki, but you also have scenes between him and all of the other party members. Yoshizawa is a social link you have, but she is also really well integrated into the game and is there from very early on as just part of the sort of larger friend group. And then this all culminates in the moment after you beat Jaldabaoth, which is the climax of the original game, where suddenly everything shifts. Right at the moment where Ren is about to basically take the hit for all of this and go to jail to help get Shido prosecuted, Akechi steps in, who you think is dead, and decides to do it instead. And then you start to realize that you are in an alternate reality, and that leads to the January events and the basically new seventh act of the game, however you want to say it. It is. And that is the moment. Let's talk about that moment where it shifts, because that is the thing where, like, when that happened, I was like, wait, what? Like, because I think I mentioned this on an earlier Release Up podcast when I started to get into the new stuff at the end. But I had, because didn't know anything particularly specific about what was new in the Royal, other than I knew that Akechi had a lot more stuff. I knew that there was this new character named Kasumi. I knew that there was this new counselor dude who was a new social link. And then I knew that there was some, like, new semester or something near the end of the game. And that's all I knew. So I didn't know the context of, like, where or how that stuff popped up. So in my head, I had just assumed for the longest time that how Persona 5 The Royal worked was that you took what the original ending of Persona 5 was, move it back, like, in the, like, in-game calendar a month or two, put in a new thing there that is all about, you introduce a new character, Kasumi, and she's like another new party member, and she has, and I assumed at that point that probably Maruki would be the villain one, because it's like, well, they're only adding in these two new characters, one of them is going to be the good one, one of them is going to be the bad one, and that ends up being right. But I thought that he would just be the normal kind of villain, and you just do another palace and just sort of add one on to the sequence of palaces that you originally do in Persona 5, and just add a new party member that way, and then incorporate Kasumi into the existing ending of Persona 5. And that's just how I assumed it would be done, mostly because Persona 5 has a very tight ending that is like everything about that ending, about your character going to jail and then all of the social link members like getting together and starting this grassroots campaign to get you released because you're being confined for like crimes you didn't commit. That is, to me, that is the most important thing about the story of the game. Like, that is what the story is about, is the kids It is the denouement in a very literal sense, yeah.
Yes, and it is like the kids realizing that, oh, we don't need our weird magic powers, and that, in fact, our weird magic powers aren't really good at changing the world, and instead, like, changing the world through the relationships we can build with the people around us and creating actual, like, political pressure to enact actual change to benefit people. Like, that's what we need to do, and that's what it is to grow up and to be a good person as you grow up. Like, that's what the story is about, and that is such a key element to the story, and one that I'm often frustrated in discussions around Persona 5 that I sometimes feel like people like just completely overlook, that is like the point that the game is building to, is like your relationships with people solving this problem not through supernatural fuckery but through like real world activism, and that's like what the game is about. And so, yeah, I thought that's so tight. How would you possibly add in something that could disrupt that ending? Because if you did, you would, in my opinion, kind of ruin the story of the game. And so when my projected version of the ending didn't happen, and instead Akechi shows up and he's going to go to jail, I'm like, oh fuck, this could go very, very bad if they don't know what they're doing with it.
It is intentionally very disorienting, and I want to talk about that disorientation, but I want to back up and underline, Sean, what you were just saying, because I think people absolutely overlook the brilliance of the ending of the original Persona 5. This is a recent Kotaku article by Renata Price. I often like her stuff at Kotaku, but this is ranking the different Persona games. And in the entry on Persona 5, she writes, "This narrative works well, but the game undercuts its strongest criticisms of institutions by focusing on replacing individual bad actors instead of changing systems themselves. It has a revolutionary fervor to it, but no actual revolutionary politics, which is disappointing." That is false. That is not a difference of opinion. And I don't just want to single out this Kotaku article. I have often seen this said, and it feels like it is coming from people who have not played the full game, because that is not true about what Persona 5 is about. Persona 5 has a very clear arc where the characters are going after individual actors, and in going through individual actors, they come to understand the more systemic problems. There's a key turning point where they realize the limits of their own power going after individual actors. The game ends with this two-pronged ending where there is the big metaphorical systemic change in fighting and killing God, right? And that is like your big sort of like overarching metaphor sort of like version of the ending. And then there's the extremely grounded version of it where they throw away their masks, they don't have their personas anymore, the protagonist is in jail, and it is through literal real politics, the hard, grimy, uncomfortable work of bringing people together and getting signatures and getting out the word and hitting the press and all of this kind of stuff, that they change public opinion on that level through a systemic social effort that is what allows them to truly grasp their own power in the world and then go forward as better people. It is just false to say the game has no sense of systemic institutional problems. It 100% does, and that was my exact worry when we get into the ending of Persona 5 Royal, is that I find that denouement so crucial to what Persona 5 is doing, I was worried they would either erase it or ruin it. And what I think is so magical about Persona 5 The Royal is that they do wind up actually doubling back on and doing that sequence again with everyone doing their grassroots politics. And it is made, I think, exponentially more powerful by all the stuff they add with Yoshizawa and Maruki and the new big batch of story that is added. And that is a miracle of narrative reconstitution that I have never seen anywhere else. It's incredible.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's a thing of where I just couldn't have conceptualized this, like this structure and how they do it, even though, like, I mean, it's built out of some very, like, familiar parts. And it is a thing that, like, when you work, because this is how I did figure out basically what the story was going to be once something started happening, just purely from the reverse engineering of, like, assuming that they're smart enough not to fuck this up, because they must be, because the rest of the stuff in this game is so good. The only way for this to happen would be to somehow get back to where they are, and it's like, okay, dream reality, okay, that means that Akechi must actually still be dead, okay, and it's like, I kind of figured out what they were doing, but only because it was like, my brain was blown by, like, the entire conception of it, because it's the other part of it that is, like, a familiar sort of archetypal story in this sort of broad, you know, shonen otaku kind of genre thing, but is it deployed here probably the most effective I've seen it done. And certainly, like, the most interesting and complicated way I've seen it done is the villain that gives you the dream of the, like, the things that you think that you want, but are the things that sort of betray the core value of shonen media, which is effort and friendship, right? That's like the Shonen Jump way, is that it's through friendship and your bonds with your friends, and through hard work and diligent effort that you overcome hardship. Like, that's what the core of that entire, like, genre is about. Like,
as Persona 4 the animation taught us, bonds of people is the true power.
Exactly. The bonds for everyone's souls. That's exactly what it's all about. And so this is a very archetypal thing. It's so much so that we very recently had an incredibly famous example of it, which is the Mugen Train movie in Kimetsu no Yaiba. But it's, like, all over the place in this kind of media. Not even in just, like, sort of Japanese or, like, Eastern media, but it's an incredibly common trope in superhero comics in particular. Like, one of my favorite episodes of Batman the Animated Series is exactly that plot, where Bruce wakes up in a dream world where his parents are still alive and stuff. And it's a very common plot type that we've seen a lot, but the way of, like, deploying it here in this, and this is not the first time we're going to make this comparison, but in the Scouring of the Shire-esque fashion, which is an extended epilogue that is a bottle story that takes place after the climax of your main story, but is like a whole story unto itself that through its juxtaposition to the main story, like creates this bigger meaning about what it means to sort of come home from war effectively, very specifically in Scouring of the Shire, and more kind of broadly or metaphorically in Persona 5, where they're not literally come back from a war, but they have gone through this big, dramatic, kind of traumatic event that they have all bonded over. And what does it mean to try to go back to what is normal from that, using this kind of archetype, this archetypal plot structure to tell that story specifically as an epilogue to this pre-existing bigger story. That to me is like a really genius kind of storytelling choice that I would have never been able to anticipate or come up with, and I was just in like utter awe at seeing it unfold in front of me and like realizing what the game's doing and being like, okay, all of those nerves I had at this split happening is slowly being turned into just like sheer admiration for like the boldness and the level of mastery of execution of what they do in this new section of the story.
I very much had a similar journey with it, Sean, and I think when I say the game is intentionally disorienting, I really mean that. I think and I think it's disorienting for people who have played it before, and I think also probably for newcomers, because the moment when you have Ren talking to Sai Nijima and she is saying, "Hey, we're probably going to need you to you're going to need to turn yourself into the police, right? Because that's the only way we're going to be able to prosecute Shido." That is the moment when the denouement of Persona 5 kicks in. We've climaxed the story, and this is the moment where the meaning is going to come in, and we're going to get basically the larger message of the story.
Yeah.
And it's in that exact moment when Akechi walks in, he literally interrupts the denouement. Literally, the dream world, the like biggest, the heart's desire, because Ren is in love with Akechi.
Yes.
Akechi walks in and interrupts the denouement by preventing the protagonist from having to do the hard thing that will mark his character growth over the previous 100 hours of storytelling, and then we go off in a different direction. And I think that is where you are kind of thrown off your feet, but I think especially in retrospect, it's very, very intentional that that is the moment when they choose to throw you off your feet, because the rest of this story is about the characters almost grappling with the nature of what a denouement is, which is the moment when you look back on the arc of a story and find the meaning within it, right? And this entire extended epilogue is that. It is the process of looking at the journey, the characters themselves reflecting on the journeys they've been on, and finding the meaning that is in there. And that meaning is not usually easy. It often involves hardship and pain and loss that they have all been through. And what they are able to do is they are able to look at the dream reality, the thing they would have wanted at the start of this journey more than anything, and the real world, which is objectively fucking shittier than that dream reality, and affirmatively choosing the shittier world because it means more to them and they are fuller human beings there. And I think one of the ways this is better than any other version of this archetypal story, which is what you were saying, Sean. Like, let's take the example of Mugen Train is as good as I've seen it done before Persona 5 Royal, right? And I think one of the strengths of the way Mugen Train, the Demon Slayer movie, does it, is that Tanjiro is not actually tempted by the dream reality. Once he realizes it is a dream, he is, if anything, kind of offended by them. He's offended by the demons using it to try to ensnare him, and he knows he has to move forward, because that is the thing that defines Tanjiro as a person, is being able to pick up the pieces and move on. And so it's a very hard moment when he has to run away from his family, as the game, the Hinokami Chronicles, memorably urges you to do. Run
Leave
from your family
behind. The best objective in any video game.
Yes. But Tanjiro has the strength to do that, and, you know, we come to see the other characters do as well. They are sad about encountering it, but they are not necessarily tempted by it. What Persona 5 Royal does that I've never really seen a piece of media do is it actually engages with the counterfactual. It really does make... This is so funny. I had pegged Maruki as the antagonist pretty early in the story, like before all the December stuff. I mean, like a couple of events into his social link, and I had texted my brother Thomas and I said, "Oh, Maruki's the bad guy, isn't he?" And he goes, "Nope, not the bad guy." And even up to the point where I'm in January and I said, "He's the bad guy. Did you just lie to me?" And he's like, "No, he's not the bad guy." And I said, "He's the fucking bad guy." And Thomas said, he's the antagonist, but he's not a bad guy. Yeah. And that is, Thomas was being a kind of asshole about it, but he had a point, and it's very true. The game does not view Maruki as a bad guy. He has done bad things. He is the antagonist. He is a detriment to progress, but he is not a bad person. And the game legitimately, fulsomely engages with Maruki's point of view and with the possibility of living in this dream world and what is good and what is bad about it. And I think it is because it genuinely engages with that counterfactual and kind of thinks about the good and bad of this, that the ultimate decision to go back into the real world, to the shitty real world where when you get back there, Ren is in prison and Akechi is dead and Morgana for 5 seconds they think is gone, and then he comes back and it's a very funny scene. Everything's worse, and that's the moment when they have to pull themselves up and do the grassroots politics, makes that original denouement 100 times more interesting, because it's not just that reality sucks and they have to improve it. They've chosen to live in the reality that kind of sucks because it's the one where they lived and grew and are full human beings.
Yeah, it's a thing of that they need to make the like active choices you're saying to accept loss and accept that like loss is something that you need to use to push yourself forward, and that like that the world and the relationships of the people that you have in the world exist because of the hardships that you've gone through, and that going through hardship and going through trauma, that there is no going back to normal, right? There is no way to put spilled milk back in the bottle, and there's like no way, there is no way to go backwards. And so all the things that you fought for you're not fighting for, and then we get to go back home and everything will be the way that it used to be, right? And this is like, just to use the comparison as we like to do to like modern American politics, right? Like this is like one of the tensions I think that there was in the most recent election that we're still having to fight through, is that like Biden in many ways is a choice of like that, certainly at least the risk, if not the inevitability of the choice of electing Biden, is like this desire to go back to the way things used to be, when that is not possible. Like, and not only is that not possible, that's like that impossibility is exactly the strategy that Donald Trump's campaign was built on, which is the idea of a make America quote unquote great again, right? Which is not a thing. Like, you can't go backwards, and even whether or not that like backwards world that you want to go back to even existed in the first place is an open question, right? Like, was An's friendship with Shiho actually ever this idealistic thing, and this like perfect relationship she has in the dream world? Was the relationship that Futaba had with her mother actually this perfect mother-daughter relationship? Like, there is no way to go back to this idealized world, because that's not actually the thing that you were fighting for. And if you think that that's the thing that you were fighting for, then that was a mistake. And instead, the thing you're fighting for is a new world, is a new reality that is built out of that yesterday, but it is a different tomorrow that you're fighting for, not a return to the past that you just had.
This is where we have to talk about Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So if you've only seen the Lord of the Rings movies, you might have heard people talk about the Scouring of the Shire as this episode that is missing in the Peter Jackson films. I sometimes think people actually oversimplify that, because I think Peter Jackson is able to get the larger thematic point of Scouring of the Shire across without literally doing it, because it would be impossible to do in a movie. But the Scouring of the Shire, if you have not read the J.R.R. Tolkien books, one, go read the Tolkien books, they're amazing. And two, the Scouring of the Shire is this big chapter. It's one of the longest chapters in the entire novel, near the end of Return of the King, where Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin come back to the Shire. So the climax has happened. Aragorn has been crowned king. All of like the basic story of Lord of the Rings is done. And when they get back to the Shire, which is this thing throughout the novel, the big novel, that all the characters are dreaming of, the day they get to go back home, right? Yeah. You hear that a lot. And they get back home, and the home has been ruined because Saruman did not die in the attack on Isengard. He has come back. He has renamed himself Sharky, which is one of the most... That is the thing I'm most sad we never got it in the movies, because I would like to hear Christopher Lee call himself Sharky. Yeah. That would be funny.
And I don't think this is the case in the description of the book, but in the movie, they would definitely have to give him an eye patch, and he lost an eye in the Battle of Isengard. And
yes.
Now he's called Sharky.
That's very true. So he and Wormtongue have come back, and they have taken over the Shire because they have been weakened and they are evil, shitty people. So they decide to go pick on the hobbits, and they are basically ravaging the land of the Shire and turning it into industry, and all of the horrible things that the hobbits had fought off in the world that they thought they were protecting the Shire from have come home and inevitably changed their homeland, and now they have to fight. And it's not just that they have to fight Saruman, they have to embrace the people they became over the course of this journey. So because of Saruman's interventions, Sam is not able to go home and be a gardener again. He has to become a leader. Merry and Pippin don't go home and be, sort of hobbits about town. They have to go home and be military leaders, the kind of people that they learned to be in the campaigns with Moria, or not Moria, with Gondor and with Rohan. And Frodo, of course, is not Frodo Baggins, head of Bag End. He is the person who can inspire this, movement and all of that stuff. So they learn, in a very real sense, the importance of the people they have become, and that their home has inevitably changed. You cannot go on it's kind of a metaphor in one sense, but it's also very literal. You cannot go on a journey like that and then go back home, and even if home hadn't actually changed, it would be changed for you. That's kind of the road I would say that Peter Jackson takes in the movie. But also, all of those characters have changed, and the only way for them to continue living as people is to embrace the new people that they are. And that is the brilliance of the Scouring of the Shire. It's a super unusual narrative move that Tolkien makes. The reason why it's kind of the only analog we have for what Persona 5 Royal is doing is because it's really rare for a story to do this second climax, basically. But it is so meaningful and so important to what Lord of the Rings is doing, and it builds to the final ending of Frodo realizing not only is he a different person, but he cannot stay in the Shire, and he goes off to the Grey Havens. And of course, if you read the appendices, you see that Merry, Pippin, and Sam just continue flourishing as new, different people. Sam is the mayor of Hobbiton and all of that stuff, right? And I think that is the final masterstroke of Tolkien's book, and I also think it is something Peter Jackson very much understood the theme of in the Return of the King movie. And I would be surprised, honestly, if it were not a conscious inspiration for what Persona 5 Royal is doing, because it is so much an analog of Persona 5 Royal is also about coming home and confronting the new you and the new reality of a world you have fought to change and what it means to live in it. My brother Thomas said something really, really insightful when we were talking about this game the other night. He said, Persona 3 is a game about death, and Persona 5 is kind of a game about life, especially Persona 5 The Royal. It's a game about what it means to go on living, and that is what this entire final act sort of gives you, and I think that's very true. And I think that's, why I compare it to the Scouring of the Shire. I think that's also, it's about how they adapt this line into the Lord of the Rings movies. How do you live when everything, has changed? And it's such a beautiful take on this kind of story, and I think it enhances what Persona 5 was already about so tremendously.
Yeah, because it really puts that emphasis on the feeling of, that the fight is never over, right? That it's there's just there is no big bad guy that you defeat and then the world is perfect and then you just get to go home and have whatever your imagined perfect life is, because you have to keep fighting in some way, shape, or form. I mean, that obviously doesn't mean that you have to be miserable for your entire life, but it does mean that that if you're choosing not to fight, you are making a willful choice to accept whatever the status quo is and to shut your eyes and cover your ears to the world around you because you're too afraid of confronting the reality of the injustices and the things in the world that should be fought against. And one of the things that's so great about this section, Persona 5 The Royal, is that it leverages its nature as a video game and a JRPG so effectively throughout this whole process, because you of course have your extra little social link scene with each of your party members where they get awakened to another persona that is a fusion of their two previous personas, which is cool. It's just a nice,
and they're all cool as shit, man.
Yeah, they're super fucking cool. But it's also, you have all these scenes that I think really kind of put an emphasis on, for each character getting to reflect on the journey that they had, on why this sort of dream world was so tempting to them, and the fact that in the heart of hearts, they there's a part of them that really sort of like wanted or believed in this version of, after we beat the bad guy, we just get the life that we wanted, and then it just stops and we just have that life, because of course that's what you want. Of course you want to just be able to like vote in the election or whatever, and then your guy wins, and then we don't have to worry about politics ever. It's just like back to normal, and it's like we don't have to think about this hard stuff, and we don't have to be stressed about it, and we don't have to go, do any calls or write any letters to Congress people or do this, that, or the other thing, because we just get to, we did it, we won the thing, and now we just get to move on with like the lives that we wish that we could have. But the world isn't shaped by lives that you wish you had. The world is shaped by the lives that you actually had, in the things you do to try to change that life that you have. And getting to encounter each character and have them go through that process of confronting it, and in that process reassert the value of their relationship to the main character, to you, the player of the game, like symbolically through your social links. It's just one of like those things that I think it's very easy to take for granted how effective the core like metaphors and symbols and presentation mechanics of Persona are towards like relationships and what those mean for people. But it's like this section like really like allowed me to kind of like rediscover that for a thing that is like so familiar for us. We've been playing these games for 10 plus years at this point. It's like you just kind of take those mechanisms for granted, but the feeling of like, if they lived in this other life, their relationship to the protagonist would eventually dissolve, because all the things that make your relationships to the people around you in the game so powerful is that you have fought together. And if you erase that fight, that means that eventually you will erase that relationship, and these people will break away, and you won't have the Phantom Thieves. You won't have this group of friends. All of those social links will dissolve, because those social links are defined by you fighting with these people, not you just coexisting with them.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better. There's the main sort of melody that replaces Beneath the Mask in the main January stretch is this song. I think on the soundtrack it's called So Happy World or something like that. But of course it's a very, very melancholy song. And it just expresses that there is this sort of like elegiac sadness. Yeah, it's called So Happy World. There's this kind of elegiac sadness to being in this like in-between state, which is what you are in January, between this dream world Maruki has offered you that is seemingly perfect and the harder choices that you have to make. And that tension is so palpable and so finely wrought. And of course, you feel it with all of the main characters, and I think adding that sort of like extra social link event with each of them is one of the master strokes. Those are beautiful scenes. Those are the scenes where I really came to love this stretch of the game, was all those denouements for everybody. But then, of course, you have it felt very finely with the big three characters you have here, which is Akechi, Yoshizawa, and Maruki, who are all defined by this choice in one way or another.
Yeah. So how do you want to break this down? Because I think we need to hit these three characters.
Yeah, let's talk about Yoshizawa.
Okay. Good old Yoshizawa Kasumire. I appreciate that she has very easy name fusion if you want to.
Yes. Kasumi, as you know her for most of the game, but she's actually Sumire. You learn early on that she had a sister who died, and then you eventually find out she is pretending to be the sister who died, and she's the sister who lived. She's actually Sumire. But Kasumi, I think, is a fascinating part of this game, because obviously she's the character who's like on the cover art and everywhere, because she's the new party member and all of that stuff, right? And we've seen this kind of character added. Obviously, the most recent analog would be with Marie, but all of the spin-offs also have, who's the fun new character who they add to the group, right? And I think Yoshizawa is the most successful of these they've ever had, in no small part because she really is. She's not. And then there's Yoshizawa. She really is a core part of the game on top of all of that. So you just meet her at a school event where you're out cleaning up, and she does this weird gymnastics thing to like catch something someone's dropping, and that's how you learn she's a gymnast. And then you make a little deal, and she teaches you some fun gymnastics to use in the palaces. And she's a character who's, had some hardship. She's an honor student, and she's having trouble keeping up with all her gymnastics and academics, and that's sad. But she seems pretty normal. And then the whole game winds up turning on this because she was Maruki's test case, basically, in this new world where he was able to take her and I think this is the moment that Maruki is closest to being a truly despicable person.
Yeah.
Takes her at this moment of tremendous vulnerability over what has happened to Kasumi, the sister who died, and her kind of having this like guilt, self-hatred thought of being like, I wish I was her. And Maruki, and again, it's like, it's both despicable, but also you understand it comes from the goodness within him. He doesn't want to see her hurting. So instead of her encouraging her to work through this pain, he gives her this off-ramp of just be Kasumi. And so Sumire becomes Kasumi and lives as that. And it is, of course, many times more painful when she has to realize the truth.
Yeah, and it's a really good, I think, twist, because this is the thing that like I didn't see coming at all, because it's like, it's one of those things that, like, it's impressive that I think it's like I've never seen or heard anybody refer to the character as anything other than Kasumi and stuff like that. So it's just like I was partially because we waited like 2 years to play the game. I was so familiar with the idea of there is this girl with the red hair and the ponytail and the bow, and her name is Kasumi, and she's the new playable character, or the new like party member in Persona 5 The Royal. That like the whole twist of, no, that's not really who she is, that she is this other person, she's Sumire, and all that. I thought that like was a very effective just twist in terms of its sort of its construction. But it also is that thing where it echoes backwards through the game, where there are all these little moments with that character that are very off, and it's hard to like put your finger on exactly what it is, because it's her. It's like the way that people talk about her, some of the ways that people talk to her, and some of it is that like to the world around her, she is still Sumire. Like everyone thinks of her as Sumire. Nobody thinks that she's Kasumi. And it's only her like sort of distorted psyche, having been manipulated by Maruki, that she hears the name Sumire and interprets it as Kasumi, and so on and so forth, to like sort of have this weird sort of Frankenstein identity that she gets to see herself in this one very distorted way, and the rest of the world doesn't see her in that way, and so it's kind of put off by her because she's totally out of place and completely lost. And I think that turn, I think, is very effective, and it echoes throughout the many appearances and the fully integrated nature of the character, that you have had this person that you like but is weird throughout the whole game. You're constantly getting these little scenes with her, and then to finally like get that moment where you see, oh, this is the thing that drives her, this is the trauma in her past that she must work through, like our other party members have had their own things that they have to struggle with. Like I just think that holistic nature with the characters incorporated into the game, and the way that the twist pulls off, is really, really remarkable.
Yeah. We said this a little bit, just you and I going back and forth on the podcast before, that we thought if someone was playing Persona 5 Royal for the first time, they might not immediately peg that Yoshizawa is the addition. And I think that might not be true in the full scope of it, because there's some stuff later on that is intentionally kind of weird and awkward with her. Like, I would say it's the moment when she awakens to her persona, and you have the hint at Maruki's palace, and this happens, I think, during the Okumura stretch of the game. And it's kind of weird because it's just Ren and her and Morgana who go in there, and then she's like, I'm not going to join the Phantom Thieves, and there's all of this. But in general, like, I think the strength that the Yoshizawa stuff has versus, let's say, Marie in Persona 4 Golden, and I want to stress here, I love Persona 4, I love Persona 4 Golden, and I love Marie. She's one of my favorite things in Persona. Marie is wonderful. But Marie very much kind of exists on an island unto Marie. Even when you have other characters coming in, she does not sort of affect the larger story. She doesn't have sort of a big, clear, like, sort of thematic resonance that kind of brushes off on everything else. And when you get to the extra month in Persona 4 Golden, it's the Marie story. Like, all of the stuff is about helping her get through her trauma and understanding that she is a god, or I forget the exact story of what happens there. It's pretty convoluted. And it's very good. I think that whole month is great. I love that palace in Persona 4. I love all the story with Marie. It's great. But what it doesn't do is then, like, have all of the other characters reflecting and rethinking their decisions and all of this stuff. I don't think Marie, like, moves the group dynamic as powerfully, But Yoshizawa really is part of the cast, and especially when you get into January, one, she really helps kind of shake up the group dynamic, and two, her story is everyone else's story.
Yeah.
It's at a moment when you are dealing with and learning about her trauma and her, narrative here, everybody else is going through things as well and is changing as characters, and it's a level of integration into the main plot that I don't think we've seen in one of these sort of Persona reduxes, so far, or from any of these new characters, because the common thing they do in all of the Persona spin-offs, be it Q or the fighting games or the dancing games, is they always add in, like, here's the one new filler character, basically, and the story will be about them, and everyone else will be kind of in a holding pattern on their existing character growth, and they won't change that much. And Yoshizawa is not that. She truly is one of the Phantom Thieves by the end.
Yeah, like, I mean, and I definitely feel that very strongly, because I was very bummed, even if I understood they're obviously, like, in a production sense, this just wouldn't really be possible. But I was super bummed that Yoshizawa is not one of the characters in Persona 5 Strikers, because it's like, 'cause she's so cool, and in my mind, she is just like a member of that group, and she's so fully incorporated in a way that, like, while I really like characters like, I think her name is Labris, is the Persona 4 Arena original character, and she's very cool, and I like her a lot. She's got a Kansai accent, and it's very adorable in that game. But, like, I wasn't really bummed when she didn't show up in Persona 4 Dancing All Night, Like, it's not a thing where I don't expect that character to continue to be with that group of characters in other spin-offs. Like, obviously, if they ever make another Arena game, it would make sense to keep her around in that, because she's also in the sequel to Persona 4 Arena. But she doesn't feel to me like she is an essential part of the Persona 4 cast in the way that Yoshizawa now feels like that to me. And it's like, they should do a DLC or something in Persona 5 Strikers, at least even if there's no story stuff, just to be able to play as her would be super cool, because she's just a cool character and she belongs in that world.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, we already talked about the vocal performance. It's a great performance. It's a great character design. I think it's just one of those iconic Soejima character designs. And very importantly so, because there's this shift between her hair up and her hair down, and glasses on, glasses off, and the sort of sumire Kasumi identities, and they eventually will sort of merge, and she will have a fuller identity of herself. But I think she just has such a cool design for all of that. I really love, she's such an endearing character too. She really wants to be so good at gymnastics. She really loves her senpai. This is one of the cases where it has always been a really smart choice of the localization team to always keep the honorifics in, because I don't know how you would write this character and not use the word senpai,
Yeah.
Because it is so crucial to her relationship with Ren, and Ren's relationship to her. You can romance Sumire, and I do think it's a very sweet romance, but it also kind of feels like big brother, little sister at a certain point,
Yeah, I mean, because that's one of the ones where, because I think she, like, actually, like, she's the one who brings it up. It's not a, like, Ren goes out of his way to be like, hey, we should be romantically involved. Let's pick that path instead of the friend path. It's like she says that, she kind of, like, confesses her feelings to her senpai, right, which is kind of a trope. But it is one of the things I think is very smart about her design, is that it gives us Persona 5 is now the, like, senpai kohai game, because the Persona games have been defined by your playable character is either the kohai character, kohai meaning underclassmen, or the senpai character, senpai meaning the upperclassmen, right? So Persona 3, you're the kohai, and so you're either are with people your grade level, or it's like you're with a dog and a robot and a little kid. So obviously they're not all, the Persona 3 cast is very eclectic. But in Persona 4, you are like the senpai character, right? So it's like your same classmen, same age class members, and then you have your group of characters like Kanji and Rise, who are younger than you and call the main character senpai, and Narukami Yu, the main character of Persona 4, is like the platonic ideal of the word senpai. When you think of the word senpai, or it's put in a dictionary, it should just be a picture of that character next to it, because he just, like, it is just that concept. And this is the thing I like with, like, Persona 5 had the original Persona 5 is a kohai game, right? It's you, class members are your same age, and then you've got Haru and Makoto, who are 1 year above you, and they're the senpai characters. And adding in this dynamic of where you have this one other character that is younger, Yoshizawa. I mean, you've also got Futaba, but she's, like, kind of outside of that construct because she doesn't actually go to school, so her relationships aren't defined in that framework. But you've got Yoshizawa, who goes to the same school, but is only a first-year student. So she's, like, 15 years old. She's 1 year younger than your character and your friends. that adds this whole other dynamic that I think also reflects on Ren, the protagonist character, in a slightly different light, and it is a thing that really defines your relationship with Yoshizawa very specifically. And it's also very smart because it's an easy way to have everybody only call her Yoshizawa at all times because she is younger than you. And so, like, nobody ever actually really calls her Kasumi amongst the main group because everyone just calls her Yoshizawa, which is a good little, like, using of how you address people in Japanese pretty effectively to kind of cover the twist.
Yeah, I think if anything, they might slip up and do it in English more, which would be like a mistake, but it's a normal thing you do in localization. And I would hear like the dissonance between the subtitles and the Japanese. But yeah, and doesn't I think Ren only thinks of her as Kasumi because he sees the driver's license that
Yes.
or the ID that she took from Kasumi, obviously.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I think all of that is super cool, and it's one of, and I think this is true of all three of the added characters, they add so much characterization to Ren because of who he has to play off of, because they're very specific to him and they're all very special to him. But yeah, I love that character. I think her entire arc in January is extremely compelling. The just wrenching emotional pain of like what has happened to her, and then also this year she has spent hiding from it, making it all the more painful. And then finally coming to, join the Phantom Thieves and start this. My brother said something else very smart about this. I think he thought was that she resists joining the Phantom Thieves for a while. She does not join after she gets her persona, and it's because she doesn't like look down on Ren for it, but she doesn't fully agree with their methods of like imposing their will, and it's not until someone else is trying to impose their will on her, being Maruki, that she joins up, and I think that's a very smart little, thematic thing going on too.
Yeah, that like I think it's that thing where it's that feeling of like wanting to make sure that like doing everything like the hard way and through hard work and effort is very much like the Kasumi thing, and like not wanting other people to impose their will over you, or like using like the Phantom Thieves, I think she sees as this like easy way out of change in the world, which is like legitimate, like it is true, like it's like the exact thing we're saying, but it's also I think like what you then realize is the real reason is not because it's not coming from the Kasumi personality, it's more coming from the Sumire personality idealizing this other vision and part of like the world and how it works, and her feeling like she is so repressed and put upon by these other like wills and entities that are making her into a person that she actually isn't.
Yeah, exactly. I said at one point, I think during maybe like the Shido Palace, that I said to my brother I was disappointed we didn't get to use her on the team yet, and he said, just wait until you see this whole story, there's a reason for it. And there's a very good reason. Like if she joined the team earlier, it would feel weird, they would have to hold back on her in so many ways. They make all the right moves there, I think. It's just a tremendously impressive character. And then all the quality, like, she very much has a Marie-esque quality from Persona 4 in that because she's the main big new addition, they go to town on everything, and they're just able to, like, all of her social link events are really, really good and well written and well thought out. She has by far the most, like, custom dialogue. If you take her on random outings or go play games with her or whatever the case, she always has more cool stuff to say because they put all this extra work into her when they didn't, all the other stuff was done. And that's a fun part of the character as well.
Yeah, no, it's just she's like she's a joy to be with, and there is like the absolute mind-fucking moment when you first get her social link and you see that it's only 5 ranks and you're like, what the shit?
What the shit is that? Yeah,
it just is so wrong, like just like the screen, and it's like that's where you're like, is that just because she's the new character and they didn't have like enough time to build a full social link, or like what the shit is that? But then the moment where it unlocks and like explodes into a full 10 social rank is great, and yeah, like it's just this weird little, like whenever you would open up the menu to look at, it's like, oh, where am I at with my other social links, and you'd see this weird half 5 one, you're like, there's something's going to happen with this, because this is just like it hurts my brain just looking at this. Here's all these meters with 10 pips, and there's this one with only 5, and my like obsessive compulsive part of me just like can't stand this, and it was very satisfying to like it is just that pure, like, leveraging your little video gamey systems and menus to deliver a story point. I thought that was, like, a very effective little tiny one. It's not that, like, you just get stopped at 5 and you can't advance it, which is the thing that happens with most of the social links. You have to get to a certain point of the story to push it forward. It's just like, no, as far as you know, with Kasumi specifically, you can only be rank 5. Because she's just a weird rank 5 half person. It's only until the real person simulator comes out that you actually can get a full rank 10 with her.
Yeah, it's very smart. I also really enjoy her in battle. I think her Phantom Thieves outfit is one of my favorites. Yes. It's so cool. It's very, as in her Showtime, she looks like she could be a character in Lupin the Third or something. I mean, it's this great, like, beauty. I was going to say beauty thief. That is Haru's actual nickname, so maybe that's the wrong one. But it's still very cool. I love the way she, like, poses during battle, all the gymnastic stuff. Her persona is super cool. Just, 10 out of 10. They did a good job on it.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you want to talk about Maruki?
Yes, let's talk about our poor, sad counselor boy.
Exactly, our poor, sad counselor boy, who I definitely pegged early on as like, oh, something's up about this. He's way too interested in this, like, psychic world, and he's a little too, like, weird and sad. I don't know if he's up to good with this stuff, even though he's extremely nice and caring throughout all of that. And I think what makes the character so interesting is that none of it is a facade.
Yeah.
He really is that guy. He really does care. There is a element to which he is manipulating these students that is skeevy in the sense that he is doing counseling, but it is also some weird form of spying and developing his ideas, and obviously that is skeevy, but you also get the sense that he does care about their pain. You don't just get the sense, it's very definitive that he cares about it, because in his head, everything he is doing is to make their lives better. And it ultimately comes out in this characterization in the last month that is just tremendously complicated and fraught and difficult. And you get to that sort of climactic scene the night before the calling card where he comes and meets you at the cafe, and you have this very frank talk about, are we going to fight or not? And it's great. And then also on the other end of that, it climaxes in basically a Yakuza fight where you rip your shirts off and punch each other. I know you don't literally rip your shirts off, but in my memory, like, even a couple hours after I finished the game, it had already become Ren and him rip their shirts off and fight and fist fight each other, because it is the most Yakuza-esque thing in any Persona game.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I really love about Maruki being the enemy, and yeah, like, I'm also with you that I kind of pegged him as the villain, partially because, again, my logic was, well, they added 2 characters, one of them is a party member, and they didn't add this dude just for a random fucking social link. So it's like, he's got to be the bad guy, right? Like, it has to be. I haven't heard about any other new characters in this game. But the thing I really like about it is, I always have a kind of complicated relationship with the, like, we fight God at the end of the JRPG, because I've seen it done very well. Right, Persona 5 does it very well. Persona 3 does it very well. Tales of Rise recently does it very well. Although, like, Tales of Rise is a very different version of that, because it's not a god; it's a planet that you fight, which is a totally different thing. But I'm always going to prefer it being about fighting people. Like, I just think that there's something about, like, I want the sort of personal element to it. It's like it, and that, like, goes all the way to my, like, I will always take, like, a cool hand-to-hand fight scene over, like, a car chase or something like that, because I want, like, the personal, physical, there's a certain amount of intimacy between, like, protagonist and antagonist in those kinds of encounters, that having the big symbolic god entity be the villain, like, can do big, cool, metaphoric, symbolic stuff, but sometimes loses that more kind of juicy human element. And so I really like Persona 5 getting to have its cake and eat its too in that respect. That you get this, really good version of the god enemy at the end, and you get, fucking shooting the bullet through Jaldabaoth, that, like, seeing the sunrise.
Most through. Epic.
It's, all that shit. Just getting to relive the original ending Persona 5 is amazing. But then being able to take that big scale stuff and kind of bring it more down to this human level, and having a human enemy that you can, like, empathize with, you see his perspective, you understand why he's doing what he's doing, but you disagree with him every step of the way and have to stop him. Like, that is, that's like a core kind of storytelling element that the Persona games obviously do all the way through the games, and then it just becomes a giant god thing at the end. And I just enjoyed getting to play a Persona game where the actual last boss and the final confrontation of the game is between 2 people and not, like, a group of people and a giant abstract concept.
I think, Persona 3 does it best because that abstract concept is death
Yes.
and you don't actually defeat it. And so it's like so much the plot of that game. But yes, I think Persona 5 gets this just kind of perfect final run where you do have the epicness of all epicness, which is the fight with Jaldabaoth, and it's a great fight. You have that fucking song is amazing in the boss fight. You have shooting the bullet through the sunrise. It's amazing. But then you do get, I think the final push of Royal is even more compelling, and it's because of choices they've made, I think, in aesthetics and in the music they've added, and that it is all this push to confront someone you care about for a really fraught vision of a world that is going to be harder and more complex to navigate. And all of that just means, I think the emotions you feel going into the final confrontations of Royal are even higher than the emotions you feel going into the final confrontations of Vanilla Persona 5. And that's saying something, because Vanilla Persona 5 is still one of the greats,
Yeah, 100%. And one of the other things I love about Maruki is that so there's a consistency to his character, like what I was saying with Yoshizawa, that once you see the full scope of what they're doing, it echoes backwards through the game in an interesting way that it recolors previous scenes, because there is this real consistency to his philosophy of the therapy he gives. It's a key dynamic to his relationship with Ren in the social link scenes with him, which is that Maruki is always advocating for the easy path, right? And one that's it's nice. It's and it's very comforting because he's a very comforting person. And it's always well, do you really need that relationship? Or it's do you really have to try that hard? Or are you not just happy without that thing? Or, and he's kind of always takes this sort of you don't have to push yourself that hard perspective, which is on the one hand nice, but then the flip side of that is that people do need to push themselves. And I love all of his interactions with the main character, where he's always kind of stunned by the strength that the protagonist demonstrates in the strength of your will and your especially for the ones that you get the points, the social link points on in particular. He always has this kind of bashful little laugh he does, and even though he doesn't animate that much because it's a JRPG, I can imagine him sort of ruffling his hair a little bit and kind of laughing a little bit bashfully. It's man, you're just that's really impressive. That's really admirable that you would fight through that pain so much. That's even though you don't have to, that you would do this thing. I really admire that in you. And it's I think there's something there that's it's so legitimate that he really does admire what the protagonist is and what he's doing in his perspective so much. But Maruki has already given up on himself being able to live life that way because of all the pain he's felt, and that dynamic I think is so rich, of this adult person who has lived this adult life and suffered all this loss, and having kind of given up and trying to get everybody else to give up too, because it's easier to just give up, and then having this teenage kid there that is so stubborn and persistent in following a more righteous life, even if it's a more painful one, and him being just kind of taken aback by it, and laughing at it, in a very good-naturedly way all throughout that game. It just, syncs up so perfectly with how he kind of turns into the full antagonist in the last stretch.
No, totally. And I just need to talk about, I feel the final push of this game and what it does with music. I'm sure we will talk more about music in general, because the Royal adds a significant amount of new music, more than Golden did. And Golden added plenty, but Golden was a 1 CD soundtrack, Royal is a 2 CD soundtrack, so it's a lot of tracks. And in that final push, I think Maruki's dungeon is the best palace in the game. I think it's phenomenal. And kind of inevitably, because it's the one where they only had one palace to make. They made it very good. It's bigger, it's more complicated, it's richer. Also, all of the January specific stuff is hitting you over the head with that this is a PS4 game and the original was a PS3 game.
Yes.
Because most of Persona 5 Royal still has those PS3 roots. It does run natively at 4K, all of that stuff. It looks great, but it's still, this was originally developed as a PS3 game. It only came out on PS4 because it took so long to get out. And then you get to all this stuff in Maruki's Palace, and it's oh, they couldn't have done this in the original game. And especially I feel with some of the final boss fights and some of the big cutscenes they do, there's some graphical stuff there where it's oh man, I've never seen Persona go this hard,
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's just like graphically, it's phenomenal, and the in-engine cutscenes and the whole ending of the game are like
Yes.
on such a bigger scale than anything they did. It's like with way more complicated camera movements and things like that. It's especially because you're playing all of the original Persona 5 stuff, obviously leading up to all of that. So it's like, the original Job the Bath sequence is very impressive, and it's more like artistically very impressive. But it's like the technological jump that they get to have in the very next sequence is like, oh right, yes, no, this is not only is this exclusive to a more advanced platform, but also they get to focus their like developmental energy in this like much smaller chunk of a game and just like really make it as spectacular as they could.
Yeah. But anyway, Maruki's Palace, it's phenomenal. I think it's the best palace in the game. It's got these sort of two basic songs you have there in the palace. You have Gentle Bad Man and Out of Kindness, which are your two instrumentals in the palace, and I think they are maybe my favorite palace music in the game, other than like Whims of Fate or something like that. Actually, you know what? Take that back. All the palace songs are great. Whims of Fate, you have the fucking arc. They're all so good. I think what Gentle Madman and Out of Kindness have is there's this just longing, gnawing sadness at the heart of both of those songs. There's Gentle Madman has, it's almost like it's not a horn part, but it's like a horn on like a synthesizer kind of thing that is doing the main melody, and it's very like longing and sad at the heart of this piece as you're running around. And so there's just a sense of like there's some gnawing emptiness at the heart of this whole thing. Then when you go in for the final day and sending the calling card, there's a song called I Believe. And the first thing I should say is all the lyrics in Persona 5 Royal, if you didn't know, were written by Lotus Juice. Lotus Juice does not rap on any of the songs, which is a mistake. They should have brought him in somewhere. But he does write all the lyrics, and he is a phenomenal lyricist. And I Believe, basically, what it does, and I think this is so brilliant, is it's like an evolution of Life Will Change.
Yeah.
And Life Will Change itself has two versions in the base game, where you have the instrumental that you get through most of the game, and then in Sai's Palace it switches to the vocal version. And then for this final palace, and I think it really, really gives you this sense of like finality and climax, even more so than in the original game, because I Believe is like this fully evolved version of the song, and that main lyric, that's exactly what it is. It is, you go from, wake up, get out there, which is this like call to action. You get Life Will Change, which is that we're doing the action, yay us, and then it is I Believe, which is that despite all of the, and I'm not going to go through all the lyrics here, we could do a dramatic reading if we want, but they're beautiful lyrics, and it goes to this like rousing chorus where Lynn is just belting it out, I believe, and it is such a rousing way to knock you into this final confrontation. And you get that also for the first phase of Maruki's boss, and then for the second phase, when he gets his big evolved persona, you get the song Throw Away Your Mask, which is basically the Maruki character song.
Yeah.
Because it is, in his perspective, singing about never having to feel that grief again and giving you this way to throw away the mask and just live in this simple reality.
Yeah, and all throughout they're reusing, as you would expect, for like Shuji Meguro and the Atlus team, they're remixing different musical elements. So like, because I Believe does reuse different melodies from both Life Will Change and then also from Colors Flying High, which is the new opening animation theme. And yeah, it's just like the songs themselves are amazing, but then they also, they fit into the overall like musical structure of both the original Persona 5 and like the new stuff in the Royal. And one thing I really like, because this is one thing that I have a little bit of an issue with in Persona 4 the Golden, is that while I really like all the music in Persona 4 the Golden, I feel like it's tonally slightly out of touch with like what the original music is, and I feel like it's really easy to tell, oh, this is a new song, because it's way more bright and poppy in Persona 4 the Golden, that original music, and there's like a drunginess and like a grungy quality and a dirty quality to some of the music in base Persona 4 that like kind of conflicts with the new stuff in Persona 4 the Golden, whereas all of this feels like it's so perfectly like intertwined and reusing different leitmotifs from the original game, and is just musically completely in sync with it, such that like if you just put all the Persona 5 the Royal and base Persona 5 songs in a playlist, I don't think, unless you knew because you had played the game, you'd never be able to identify one of these is from a different version of the game than the others.
They all got slapping bass parts.
Yes.
That's what matters, No, you're absolutely right. And I just think that evolution of songs you get, because the other one that's important is Ideal and the Real, which is the song that you get during all of Maruki's social link events and all of his counseling sessions, and pieces of that become different motifs during the last month, and then there's another version of it that plays at the beginning of the end credits before you get a song that we will definitely be talking about in a little bit, Bokura no Hikari, which is a trip. Yeah. But yeah, I think that general evolution of music, like, I have not gotten I Believe out of my head since the other night, and I was just in awe, and I was just like running around Maruki's palace more than I needed to hear it, because it is such a beautiful culmination of the game's musical identity. And then that song, Throw Away Your Mask, it's one of those examples of how much Persona, I think unique among video games, does with music for characterization and theme,
Yes, 100%. And then also, I want to shout out the instrumental version of Throw Away Your Mask, Keep Your Faith, has some of, like, the most sick, fucking screeching bend notes I have ever heard on an electric guitar. Like, the notes that play at the end of the chorus of Keep Your Faith, because as is typical with Persona instrumental versions of lyric songs, they just have the lyric melody is played by an electric guitar. That's probably Shoji Meguro, because he's the guitarist on most of those songs. And there's just a really perfectly dialed in quality to the guitar bends, which bending a note is when you bend the string and it makes the pitch increase. So it's that like noise you hear in rock music, like that's usually what they're doing. And it's the distortion and the bend. It just is like, it feels like the fucking guitar string's gonna break. It's a really good, if you play guitar, it's like guitar music porn or something to me. It's just, I love how fucking gnarly that bend is at the end of that. So much so that, like, I think it might actually be my preferred version of the song just for, like, that element, even though, like, the lyrical singing by Lin and then the lyrics themselves of Throw Your Mask are amazing. There's something about the fucking just gnarly-ass guitar in Keep Your Faith that I really love.
No, it's very, very good. And I think that the way they wrap up all the Maruki stuff is just tremendously interesting. We joked about it being a Yakuza ending, but as everyone is flying away, one, I need to mention there's a scene where Morgana becomes a full-on helicopter, yes. And that is one of the best, like, stand-up and cheer moments in all of Persona. He finally does it. He finally flies.
Yeah, and it uses up all the power of Jose's magic crystal that is the magic crystal that you use to somehow do team up moves. Like, I love, like, I like to think about, like, what is the real world thing that is actually happening with this weird magic crystal that allows you to do all this shit. But yes, that's an amazing moment.
Yeah, it's an amazing moment. And then you get this final scene between Maruki and the protagonist where they wind up just duking it out, and you have the whole battle screen, but all that is highlighted is X, so you fucking throw a punch, And I love that. And I love that scene has, even more so I think than anything in the original Persona 5, just this sense of finality where it is Ren and Maruki alone on this, like, big beam in this collapsing palace. Maruki even says the metaverse is disappearing. You're losing. They're using their fists because their personas are gone. Everything is falling apart, and it's just this final moment of fighting. And even after everything Maruki has done, of course, the protagonist tries to save him, and that leads into this very sudden shift into the Velvet Room that brings us back around to the beginning of the game, or the beginning of this month of the ending. And then leave some wiggle room for where they're going to go with Maruki, at the very end of the game. But I think it's such a beautifully rousing conclusion. And we didn't even talk about the most rousing thing in all of it, which is the way you defeat evil, like, big shadow Maruki in the palace, where he does his big, like, evil demon punch down. Ryuji and Morgana and everyone go in and hold it back with their force of friendship power. And then Ren does his, they know what they're doing at Atlus. They have him use his grappling hook, and he swings around, shoots him in the face, and says, "Checkmate." It's really cool. I did not know if they were going to be able to top how fucking cool the Jaldabaoth climax is, and they do, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's particularly, it's made even better by the fact that Maruki has the two personas, right? He has his normal, like, his weird octopusy one, and then it evolves into basically like one of the gods from the backstory of fucking Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, just like the big fucking, like, behemoth titan looking thing. And all it does is just like punch shit. Which is just really great. And yeah, and the getting Fukuyama Jun, who when we were doing our voice actor roundup, we did neglect to mention the man who says the names of every single persona in the game's compendium very dramatically, because the voice, the main character is voice acted, just in the game's not very much, but Fukuyama Jun does get a couple little lines, including checkmate there, and it's always, you know, it feels like he gives it 110%, because it's like, this is one of the 10 new lines I got to record for this game. I'm really going to lean into it.
No, it really is stunning that, like, this is a completely added, reworked, you know, epilogue ending, whatever you want to call it, and it has this real sense of, like, finality and climacticism and culmination that is somehow, I feel like, even greater and more profound than what the original vanilla-based version of the game had. I would never have imagined that was possible in the way they have done this, you know?
Yeah, it's again, it's the, like, exact, like, you know, the arc of the, like, oh god, are they going to fuck this up, into the, like, oh my god, this is amazing. It's a real journey that this whole stretch of the game takes you on to that moment.
The level of execution is just off the charts.
Yeah.
It's unparalleled. It's amazing. Before we talk about how they wrap up the full story, because I really want to dive into that, I think we should double back and talk about our boy, Akechi Goto.
Yes, you mean Kira Yamato from Gundam Seed, who's here. I do love that you do get a couple of scenes of, you know, it's Kira and Durandal from Seed Destiny. They get some scenes together, because it is not the first time that those two actors have been together, as we now well know.
But it's the best thing they've done together. That's for goddamn sure.
Yes.
Yes. No, man, it's... I do think... Would you agree with me that Akechi is kind of the most remarkable addition to Persona 5 Royal?
Yes, absolutely. It's the... Again, I mean, it's to me, it's the kind of the fundamental raison d'etre for this thing of like... I think it feels like it's the thing that Atlus internally knew that there were probably bigger plans for that character, that, you know, things happened in development, they didn't come all the way through, and that also, like, legitimately in Japan, like, he is a hugely popular character specifically through the, like, you know, people like to ship him and the protagonist together, and so there was, like, a fan demand for more Akechi Goto, and that combined with, like, there is a need within the game's story, that it is, like, you know, in what is a really well-rounded, very well-polished game, it is the one clear, notable weak link that, like, that character's story doesn't feel like it's fully executed in the base game. And so it is, like, you know, it is the reason why, in many ways, I was, like, always excited about the idea of Persona 5 The Royal, was because it's like I wanted to see this character kind of done right, because it felt like that potential was there originally, and it just kind of was left on the table.
And the thing is, I know in those original Persona 5 podcasts we did, Sean, neither of us were necessarily that hard on the Akechi side of the game. I think we both expressed that there were things that could have been done better. But I remember us being, like, very effusive about how it's all done in November with the Sainijima Palace, and that we really liked how he comes onto the team, and that Robin Hood is a funny persona, and he's got that stupid red mask, and he calls himself Crow, and, like,
he's got a fucking laser gun, which is the best thing in the world. Everyone else has, like, a pistol, a shotgun. It's like, here's me with my fucking ray gun, guys.
Yeah, and I think you and I both thought that, like, if the intention was to misdirect the audience, it failed pretty hard, because just everything about him sort of screams he's going to be the antagonist, not he's going to actually be a member of your party. But we were still impressed by all of that, and obviously good stuff is done there. But I think playing through the way Royal does it makes it seem like a much bigger weakness in the original Persona 5 than I think I perceived it to be originally.
I mean, in particular, the original versions of his social link scenes, which were, like, automatic ones that you just encountered as the story went on, all of those are still in Persona 5 The Royal. They're just so anemic and so on the edges that if it wasn't for the fact that I had already played the game, and so I knew that that's what those originally were, you would never in a million years peg those scenes out. Or, like, there's a couple of them that are a little bit more meaty, but the majority of them are like, oh, I went to... You know, we bumped into each other in front of the subway, and we said, like, 3 sentences to each other. And it's a thing where you don't realize how much impact having the screen go, whooshing, and then a big number 3 pop up on the middle of the screen or whatever, gives you to feeling a satisfaction in a social link rank up. Because when that's gone, you're like, this is a totally nothing little kind of flavorful, like, a little tiny piece of flavor that is no more remarkable than any other scene where you bump into another story character in front of the subway, which is a like expositionary trick that Persona 5 has. And this is just sort of arbitrarily made to be one of his social link ranks because there needs to be a certain number of them before the end of the game. And it's like getting the contrast of the real deal, full-bodied, really compelling social link events that are now ones that you intentionally trigger, and then seeing the little tiny measly ones that were in the original game. It definitely is like one that it makes the original seem much weaker in retrospect.
I think one of the most fascinating moments in all of Persona 5 The Royal is what was Akechi's final scene in the original game, which is when you confront him in Shido's palace, and he tries to kill you. You have a big boss fight. Then he goes crazy, but then he kind of relents and saves everyone from the flooding ship, and then he seemingly dies. And that's it for him in the original game. And that scene is note for note identical between the two versions, other than there's a little beat at the end with Ren wondering if he's really gone and remembering the promise they made, which sets up everything in the future. But other than that, it's identical, and I was watching it, and it felt like a new scene to me. Yeah. It felt like a different scene to me in the Royal. I even texted my brother and said, did they change anything in that? Because it felt so much more substantial, but I don't think they did. He's like, no, they didn't change anything. And it is completely an example in like context where I feel like around that big key scene, they did the full fleshed out version of Akechi I imagine they kind of always had in mind, but they never were able to execute in the original game for whatever reason. They had a lot of characters to execute. And so you have all of the social links leading up to that, where you see Akechi the celebrity, and you see Akechi the competitive guy at billiards, and you see him as the sort of lunatic who takes you into Mementos and makes you fight him, and all of these crazy, interesting moments where you get a more fulsome sense of this really complicated, neurotic, damaged human being who then sort of goes up in smoke in this scene, and you feel something is unfinished, and Ren wants to be with that human being more because he means something to him, and that is the wish that the protagonist is given in January. It just makes for one of the most brilliant character arcs and characterizations in a series that is chock fucking full of brilliant character arcs and characterizations.
Yeah, and it's just that thing of like, it shows how like meaningful that some of that kind of like adding in pieces of context like that can be, that it is like a thing where it totally revolutionizes existing scenes in the game. And that is like the big one is his death scene. Because I was like you, like I was staring at that scene like eagle-eyed, being like, because I knew he was not going to die in this version of the game, or something like that. Because obviously, like, if you're going to add more with him, the thing you would change is that he doesn't get killed. And there's always like I think very intentionally, there's a mystery around his death, and that you never get to see it. Like, you hear it, and it's very clear, like, just by the audio, you would assume there's absolutely no way he would escape it, but you never actually see Akechi die, and that's true in both versions of the game. So I was, like, looking at that scene to see, like, where are they going to add something that makes it plausible that he escaped? Because I just assumed that the change that they would make is he escaped the scene somehow, because there's clear space for them to do it. And I think the thing that's so oppressive is that they didn't change that scene at all. I was like, oh, that's weird. I just assumed that there would be a thing here that would change that and make it give him an out somehow. And then so I was like, weird. I guess he is kind of dead. I wonder how the fuck are they going to pull this off? And then he's not dead. And you're like, but they didn't do anything to make it any more plausible that he would survive this sure death scenario. And then that, of course, that he is actually dead. And that, like, playing with that context and the meaning around all the stuff that he had in the original version of the game, it's just like a really masterful example of where this kind of updated version with some like nips and tucks can take things and reuse them wholesale and make them mean something so much more than they originally did.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing to say is just that his actual, like, the 8 ranks that they've added for his social link in this version of the game are one of the best social links in Persona 5.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful courtship between Ren and Akechi, where they are going to the sauna together, and they are playing billiards together, and they are going out for coffee dates, and he's the one who introduces you to the jazz club in what I think is the most sexually charged scene in all of Persona. 3, 4, 5, whatever. It's Akechi and Ren at the jazz club, here listening to No More What Ifs, which is such a good song. You have all of that culminating in this scene during the final month you have him in November, where he meets you down in Mementos and just isn't able to keep in that side of his personality that is just raw, mean, competitive, and you have this fight in Mementos, which is fully voiced, your rare rank 8 fully voiced thing in Persona, and it's so good. Again, up and like before you even get to all of the added stuff in January.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a thing that it's very essential because it's a thing that executes on what was clearly always the intention with the character, but I think this is the thing that, like, never really played all the way in original Persona 5, even though you could tell this is what they wanted, which is he is the mirror version of the protagonist, right? Like, he's the other character who is given the wild card. He's the other person in the, like, experiment who has the capacity to make more personas. That's a very good example of something that plays much better in this game. I remember this line now, and it's a line that existed before, but it never really stood out to me, is Morgana pointing out the fact that, like, you have the exact same power he did, but you squandered it so much that the only thing you ever managed was to make two personas, your goody-goody persona and your evil persona, whereas the protagonist, because the protagonist is so giving and working with so many people and has all these relationships, he has a new face, right? He has a new persona for every relationship that he has. It's like the metaphor of what those are. And so that's why he's so overflowing with, like, power and, like, this abundance of personas. And in comparison, Akechi theoretically could do the same thing, but he squandered it so much. Like, that line plays so much better when you have all that additional context. So he's got that, the wild card pairing. You've got the mirroring of the protagonist character is, like, dresses himself in villainy as a thief, but he is actually working for, like, justice and trying to do good in the world. Akechi dresses himself in heroism as the boy detective, but is actually, a serial killer, an assassin, and is trying to do bad in the world. Their designs are paired together, which is the thing that, your, like, Pixiv fan artists are going to love and do. I can't tell you how many times I've just stumbled across images in looking at, like, Persona stuff of, hey, here's, like, Rin, like a yin-yang thing. I feel like it's how everyone draws this, where it's like Rin is they're both lying in a field of grass or something, and Rin's head is curved this way and it's black, and then Akechi's head is curved this other way and his hair is, like, soft brown, and it looks like they're about to kiss. I think that's the only fan art that anyone has ever drawn of any of these characters, because it's just the only thing you will ever see. Because they're designed that way, right? They're always meant to be mirrored. They're meant to be paired. They're meant to be two halves of what should be a more complete whole, because they both come from very damaged backgrounds. But Akechi was trapped in the net of Shido much earlier in his life than the protagonist was, and that's the main thing that separates them, is that Akechi was never able to escape and be out from under Shido's purview, whereas the protagonist's life was set astray by Shido at this one moment, and then he is able to build a life outside of that and then come back to it. And it's that kind of tragedy of that they should be able to have done the same things and lived the same kind of life, but because of this one key difference in their history, they were split off into these kinds of opposites.
And so what they do in January with it is, I think, maybe the most beautiful and heart-wrenching and complicated version of this, like, dream reality split that the game is playing with, where Akechi's mere presence in the game for that final act is Ren's dream come true that Maruki has given him, right? Is another chance with this guy who seemingly could have been your best friend in a sense, right? And now you have the sense, you have the time to spend with him, and he's on your party, and it's like literal wish fulfillment in a sense. But what's so dynamic about it is that Akechi knows from the beginning that this is a wish, that he is alive only by the grace of this false reality, and he rejects it even though it means he is alive. And I think Ren, he's silent, but I think he knows it too. And that is kind of the hardship of moving through this whole thing, is that the ultimate sacrifice that this is going to mean is that this friendship will be sundered, and Akechi will go back to being dead, missing, however you want to read it. Dead, basically.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful, and I think the version of Akechi that you get in that final month, who has that evil side to him, man. Look at his Showtime, listen to his evil laugh, listen to his narration when you're in the palace and he's doing the guidance and all of that, the navigation. He's got that evil side to him, but he also has this pride and this intelligence and this like kind of no-nonsense sense of what has to happen that is this mirror of all of Ren's best qualities, right?
Yeah.
And they do get along. And there is like, Ren loves everyone in the friend group. We all love everyone in the friend group, but Akechi is the one who's kind of just for him, that is his friend who is like a friend on his terms, who he understands and who understands him in a way no one else, not Ryuji or An or Makoto or any of them, can really understand him. And having that person there is in some sense a dream come true. And it is the thing that they're going to lose when they get to the end of this thing. And man, what a fascinating fucking character dynamic to have in so many different directions, including Akechi himself being as hardcore as anyone else on the team, more hardcore, frankly, about finishing this, defeating Maruki, going back to the real reality, even though it means he will be gone. That is a hell of a story to tell.
Yeah, because if there's like one way in which the protagonist character in Akechi are like absolutely the same and in lockstep on is like their absolute defile or like the like their
defiance.
Yeah, their defiance against incorrect and abusive authority, right? It's the thing that like they refuse to be put into chains or to be subjugated by anyone or anything, and that's like what defines them, right? That's like the symbology of the game. I mean, that's the symbology that goes to the announcement of Persona 5 as a game, was like the imagery of breaking chains, right? And that's like Akechi is the one character that is as powerful in that sense and is as confident in that sense as the protagonist is. Akechi was just going about it in a very roundabout, like murderous way, right? Because he didn't just want to break out from underneath Shido. He wanted to break out, stick the knife in, twist it real fucking hard, and laugh in Shido's face when he was getting to do it. Like, and that's his mistake, is that he wanted to relish in the victory of what he was wanting to do, more than just actually accomplishing it.
He wanted to do a Char on Mr. Char, basically.
Yes, exactly. You can't Char. He's the one man who can't be Charred.
Yes. No, it's so true, and I think that is this dynamic that I love, that there's so much space in this version of the game to explore that, to have fun with that, to let the actor Hoshi have this real space to stretch his legs and explore the character as a performer. All of it is just beautiful and fascinating. You have this little moment at after the credits where Ren wakes up on the train and thinks he sees Akechi outside, and then sees this other version of himself. And I've been mulling over that moment, and because you also have the scene on the final day when you're giving all your goodbyes where the jazz club owner, if you go talk to him, talks about Akechi, and then you realize his glove is still in your pocket. And so there is a little bit of ambiguity. Is Akechi dead? Is he out there somewhere? What is going on? I thought my brother had a good read on this, which was that he sort of read it as like, Akechi is out there somewhere, but the question of like alive versus dead is almost irrelevant, because there's this earlier line Akechi has when Maruki comes to the cafe the night before and Akechi urges you to deny him. You say, but you're going to die. And Akechi says, don't worry about that. I'll make my own way. And maybe he does make his own way. Is he out there in the shadow world somewhere? Is he in the isekai? They call it the metaverse in English. Yeah. Is he in the other world? Is he just in the beyond? Is he literally alive and walking around? I like that there is this sort of and that final image is the protagonist also seeing the Joker side of himself, who is still in there, out there somewhere. And I almost think that scene, it's not really, to me, a plot thing. It's a thematic thing. Yeah. It's that Akechi is out there somewhere in the sense that he lived and he mattered, and he will always be in the protagonist's life for that reason.
Yeah, because I definitely read it as, because, they're not, I would be shocked if they ever did, like, a spin-off story and it, like, revealed that, no, Akechi is really secretly alive. Like, if they ever do a thing like a Persona 5 Q2 or something and want to use Akechi in the game, they'll just pull him from, like, an earlier part of the timeline or something. Because it'd be too...
They did do Persona Q2. It would be Q3.
I guess I meant like Persona 5 Q, like another Persona Q with the Persona 5 cast is what I meant.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And so so they wouldn't want to, I think, ever deal with the messiness of trying to actually bring in that character post this game. So yeah, like I definitely don't read it as a plot thing. And for me, it's like I kind of just read it as like, yeah, he's dead. Like he died there. That he's like gone in that like mortal sense, but that he lives on through your relationship with that character, right? That bond is still there, and that like the flash of Akechi that you see in the background of that shot that Ren like kind of misses, and then he doubles back and sees his own reflection, to me is like symbolic of that fact, right? That like that the mirror version of himself that was Akechi out in the real world is now integrated into Ren, and that like he is both those people made whole now through their experiences and through his relationship.
Yeah. I think it's very powerful, and I love what you were saying there, Sean, about, you know, that these are the two characters who are most opposed to authority chaining them down. And I think it is the ultimate way to express that idea, is that one of them knows he's probably going to be gone from this world without this authority, and he would rather just take that, you know? And it's really beautifully done.
Yeah, and it is just a super badass thing to do. Like, it's just, you got to give the man props for this. Like, if I'm going to live in a world ruled by God, or am I just going to say, fuck it, let's kill God even if I die in the process? And that's a pretty badass way to go.
I like it. Yeah, no, absolutely. He's so much fun in combat too, because I love his second persona he has. I think all of the like new fused personas, it's such a smart thing to do, because the way Persona 4 Golden did it is you have the persona, the upgraded persona, and then in Golden they just added a third persona, you know? But I love that in Royal, everyone has their first two personas fuse, and so you get really cool stuff like Makoto's third persona is like a motorcycle that's also a fucking train that is all together and is super cool. There's stuff like that. I love, Yusuke's maybe has the best one, who is like, it almost looks like a fucking pimp with like a big fur coat on. Mm-hmm. He's just badass. Anyway, they're all cool, but I do love the idea that Akechi's, it's not that he had one persona then another. He always had these two, and then they fuse into that final third persona of his. The one, I forget what they name his last persona, because he has Loki and he has Robin Hood, and I forget his third persona, but it's really neat. And then I also just love the fucking stupid black outfit he is wearing in the final dungeon. I like that both of Akechi's outfits look objectively dumb. His like crow outfit with like all white with the red mask, and then all his like black Batman outfit. They both look fucking lame, and I think that is exactly right for this character.
Yes, yeah.
So funny.
He is extra, right? Like when he goes for it, he goes for it very hard. And that is definitely represented in his clothes.
Yeah, but he is so fun to have on the team, and I basically never took him off the team after I had him again in January, because he is so much fun to have in there.
There's just something nice about having this very just like sarcastic, mean motherfucker on your team that just like, I mean, it's a lot like, you know, because it's kind of pulling from this trope, but it reminds me a lot of like Vegeta in the Cell saga and stuff like that, of just like, I'm okay, fine, I'll be here because I also want to fight these guys, but I'm gonna make fun of you fuckers the entire time because you suck shit. I have a real fondness to that dynamic in the more kind of like fun character scenes in the January section of the game.
I think it's a little weird when like they're deciding to let Akechi back on the team. They keep saying stuff to the effect of like, we're just gonna have to put our personal stuff aside, and I'm like, I don't think it's personal stuff. That dude killed a lot of people.
Yeah, that dude like, killed your dad, Haru. Like, fuck.
Yeah. I think it goes a little beyond like you had personal beef. This is just a serial killer you've got on your team. But anyway, let's talk about how they've reworked the ending, because this does something very different than Fess or Golden in that it just has a different ending.
Yeah.
I know Golden technically has like the extra scene at the end that for some reason is not a post-credit scene, should be a post-credit scene, but it's effectively different enough that the original ending is still in there, right? Mm-hmm. Where you have Narukami on the train. But this one just has a completely different ending song, built out of some of the same pieces. But man, I adore how they have changed the ending. I think it is so phenomenal. One of the things, if you listen to our original Persona 5 discussions, you'll hear me talk about is one of my kind of complaints with Persona 5 that I kind of ultimately came around on was that it does the same thing 3 and 4 do, where there's a last day where you're going to be leaving town, right? Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt, and I still feel this a little bit about original vanilla Persona 5, that it feels a little like, I don't know, like they're doing that out of, like they feel like they have to, you know, to do it because it's part of the other ones, not that it's an organic part of this game, because it's there in 3 because the protagonist dies. It's there in 4 because Narukami has a family to go back to. In 5, I guess Ren nominally has a family, but they are bad people who abandoned him, and Persona 5 is so much about found families and about making your own way that the idea that it would end with him just up and going home really felt dissonant to me. And I think the way they sort of squared that circle in the original is having the ending where they all get on the bus together and leave, with the very open implication that he might just not go home, right? Mm-hmm. And that they can make their own way. But I think Persona 5 Royal improves upon it so vastly by recontextualizing his choice to go home and having all of the characters having this very clear decision to move on with their lives. Where Ryuji has decided to move away so he can go rehab his leg and become a track runner again. Haru and Makoto are moving out to go to college and, expand all of their dreams. Futaba is going to be going to high school. An is going to be going and studying abroad. And so instead of becoming this very sort of like, I think out of the blue thing of Ren leaving while everyone else stays behind, it becomes a story, a kind of high school graduation story about everyone leaving and going their own ways to grow up. And I think it becomes the best possible version of the ending of Persona 5, which is about moving ahead into a world that is changing and is new and is unexpected, but with all of the bonds you made still inside of you, empowering you. And I just think it honestly makes me realize how much I think the original Persona 5 ending is missing, because this one is so much richer.
Yeah, and there's a real irony to it as well, because the original end credits song, which is obviously isn't in this game because they did a new one, which is a bummer because like there is like a certain musical thing that feels like is lost by the fact that the original end credits song is the like culmination of the leitmotifs that play throughout the last 10 hours of the game. And that the original last 10 hours of the game, and the original last boss theme and all that kind of stuff. And so it is a bummer if you haven't played the original Persona 5 that you're kind of missing out on that, which is fun. But that original song, The Stars in Us, like that song is about people breaking away and moving and physically moving away from each other, but still being connected because we all are they're all looking up at the same stars. And that's like what that song is about. It's about saying goodbye, even, and that being sad, but you still know that you'll always be connected because we all see the same world and we're all living in the same world together, which is of course inflected by Morgana's statement of that there is no such thing as the real world, that we all make the world that we see, that the world we live in is the cognitive world, and that like it being this separated thing was wrong the entire time, and that because of your relationships with these other people, you are making that world with them, and you are all living in the same world because you perceive it the same way through your bonds. And that's what that song was about. But the original ending of Persona 5 feels like it's slightly off from that perspective, because it's weird to have that be what that song is about, but have the last image of the game be all of the characters together on that van, which has always like struck me like after the fact. I don't think I ever made that comment on the original podcast. I do not remember.
No, you didn't.
But like afterwards, when I've listened to the soundtrack, it's a thought that has come to me thinking back on the ending to the game. And so I think it's like there's an irony to they have changed the ending here in a way that much more thematically matches what that original end credit song was talking about, but that original end credit song isn't in the game anymore.
But
yes,
we got a new end credits song, Bokura no Hikari, which I think is one of the most remarkable musical moments Persona has ever had.
It's a hell of a fucking song. It is a hell of a
I think it's got Lynn's best vocals in the entire series. She is belting her fucking heart out at the middle of this song. I've listened to it several times since I played the game the other night, and it literally takes my breath away every time, Sean. It's a remarkable, remarkable song. Do you want to tell us about it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an amazing song. Like, one thing I liked about it is the song's like 7 minutes long, so it's a long song. I think the thing that is impressive about it is, like, almost the entire runtime of that song has Lynn singing on it. It's not like, and here's like the big 2-minute instrumental break in the middle, which you'd kind of expect. Like that's how, most of the Persona end credit songs do that. This was like, no, it's just like, and it's not even like, has a lot of lyrics. It's just like the pace of the song is so slow, and it's this slow build up. It's a great song, in that sense, but
it's,
yeah, go ahead.
I also just wanted to say it's Lotus Juice did the lyrics for this too, and I believe this is the only Persona song he's written in Japanese. All of his other Persona songs are English lyrics. And this is such a beautiful song. I think that's really notable.
Yeah, and so it's as is tradition in Persona games, the only song that is sung in actual Japanese is the end credits one. And this song is basically a love elegy from the perspective of the protagonist talking to Akechi, right? And so like that's why it has this very elegiac quality to the music, and it's very heavy. So I'm going to read out the English language translation of the song. Although, like, just should be noted that, like, the Japanese lyrics are so gorgeous. Like, it's very, as is you'd get in Japanese lyrics, they're incredibly poetic, in that they are, like, they're, like, standalone phrases that create bigger meaning through juxtaposition. So I'll probably stop in one or two places. I know I'll definitely stop at the end, because I actually disagree with this translation of the ending. But there's a lot of interpretation that goes into translating Japanese lyrics, because a lot of information...
Why don't you read the Japanese and I'll read the English? We could do it that way.
That I feel like that would take a long time. Do you want? We're 3 hours and 30 minutes. Do you want to do it?
I'm fine with it. Are you on the Megami Tensei wiki?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. Why not?
Okay, this might be... So should I read the full, like, paragraph, basically, and then have you read a full paragraph? Because I think it'd be kind of hard to split.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yume wo yume to kizuita yoru. Kimi wo mitsume, mabuta o tojiru. Nukumori mo kasaneta te mo, koe mo, mezamereba maroromi e to kiete.
On the night I realized this dream was a dream, I gazed at you, then closed my eyelids. If I woke up, your warmth, your hand on mine, and your voice too, would disappear together with my slumber.
Bokura ga nidoto ae nakute mo, sugita toki ga itami ni kawatte mo, sono itami de ne, michibite yo, boku wo terasu yozoru no hoshi e to.
Even if we'd never meet again, even if the time that has passed should transform into pain, that pain will guide me towards the stars of the sky that shine above me.
Amai amai, otogi no kuni. Kimi to aeta yuganda sekai, itsuwari no shiase demo ii to, tsugeru kuchi kimi ga sotto fusagu.
You put a stop to that sweet, sweet fairy tale kingdom, that distorted world where I met you. You gently covered my mouth before I could say a false happiness would be enough.
Omoide no hajimaru hi ni naru. Kimi ga kieta jibun de kimeta michi aruku no sa, zutto setsunaku demo. Boku no mezasu ashita no hoshi e to.
When the morning comes, and I begin to remember, you will be gone. But even if it will be painful, I will go on and walk along the path that I've chosen for myself, towards the stars of the future I awoke into.
目覚めた現実が来る昨日と違う悲しみが大切だから明日を生きていく。
Since the sadness felt in waking into a reality different from yesterday's is important, I will live on.
僕らが二度と会えなくても、過ぎた時が痛みに変わっても、その痛みさえ超えていくよ。流す涙のり、声より高く。
Even if we would never meet again, even if the time that has passed should transform into pain.
そして掴むよ。澄み切った空。永遠に浮かぶ僕らの光よ。
That pain will go beyond the tears that flow and will reach our light that will float eternally in the sky.
Yeah, so basically, if you listen to this song without knowing any of the context of the game, this is a song about a married couple where one of the partners has passed away and the remaining partner has to live on and wake up the next day and move forward, knowing that like they can't wallow in their grief and must live for tomorrow instead of live for yesterday, which is basically one of the lyrics of the song. And it is the most like romantically charged song, certainly in like the Persona series, and it is fucking amazing. I mean, the opening stretch of this song is into like the imagery it conjures is like someone waking or like they basically waking up in the middle of the night, looking over at like the pillow next to them and thinking about they closing their eyes and thinking about the warmth of the person they're missing, the feeling of their hand entangled in theirs, and the sound of their voice, and not wanting to wake up, because when you wake up, you know that those things will disappear along with like the sleep you're entering. It is like
Sean,
very explicitly heavily romantic.
It's so romantic that I gotta admit, I felt a little uncomfortable reading it with you.
Yeah, right. I was too focused on trying to make sure I wasn't fucking up any of the Japanese pronunciation, so I wasn't focusing on that part at all.
I know, but just yeah, it's if you're rolling your eyes, it is like it's not romantic. It's romantic, guys. Come on, come on, look at this.
Definitely, there's a couple of phrases in Japanese that I really love. Of like one of the lyrics, which is the like, the sadness of waking up to a different day than a day that is different than yesterday is important. So I'm going to continue to live for tomorrow. Like I think that like it's a hard thing to translate, but it's very like the way it's phrased in Japanese is so gorgeous, and like the idea of that like it's like that sadness that things change is important, is like putting it in that sense of like that the next day is different than the day that came before it. I think that phrasing is really beautiful. But I think the one place where the translation I think on this one is a little bit off, because I think it kind of misattributes the subject of the sentence, is in the last sort of chorus that ends the song, where it goes back to, it kind of restates the first half of the chorus as it originally came in, which is like, even if we never see each other, even if the time that passes turns to pain, and it does that one in the original use of the chorus. It then goes on to kind of like talk about that pain will guide me, and it will guide me to like this like star in the night sky that guides me from up above. And then when it comes back to that, it hits the same notes of that even if we never see each other, and even if the time that passes between us turns into pain, I will overcome that pain. And the way this is then phrased of Nagase namida nori koe yori takaku is there's this like real emphasis of like, I'm going to overcome this pain. I'm going to go up above and surpass it, even from the tears that I'm shedding. This is where the song is using the Japanese particle yo, which puts emphasis, which it doesn't do anywhere else in the song. And it uses it like 3 times right here at the end as this like way of him like the protagonist saying to Akechi, like emphatically, like, I'm going to overcome this pain. I'm going to overcome it, and then I'm going to grasp it. Soshite tsukamu yo. Like, I'm going to grab it from that, like, perfectly clear sky, this thing that floats eternally, this light of ours. There's such an affirmative statement coming in at the end of it that I think, like, the English translation kind of misses, because it doesn't do it from the I perspective, even though I really think it's supposed to be the protagonist saying this thing emphatically from their perspective, because the use of yo. And that's, I think, is the thing that like really hits me in the lyrics, is it's so, the song is this big dirge, it's very heavy, it's got this funereal quality to it because it's about this person you love who is no longer there, but then it ending with this really powerful affirmative and like defiant statement about like, I will fucking overcome this pain, and I will overcome all of this, and then I will use it to grab this future. And instead of in reversing the imagery of before, it was a star in the night sky, and then the way that it's phrased in Japanese implies that like the light of ours is now the sun at the end. Like, it's just really beautiful writing. That then combined with the musical elements, and of course Lynn's singing, which I'm with you 100%. Like, all of her singing in Persona 5 is amazing, but this is my favorite use of her vocals. It's a really beautiful song.
And like, it is about the protagonist and Akechi, but obviously it's also about all of it, yes. Right? It's about the entire last month. It is about losing something and choosing to face the loss, like actively, consciously, every day, grabbing that pain, overcoming it, instead of living in the past, Mm-hmm. Which is why it's the end theme here, even though I do think there's a part of me that thinks like Hoshi no Tobokuro is like the original end theme is the better overall Persona 5 end theme for the game. Yeah. I actually probably like this song more. I think it's such a great song. But for the specific stuff they've added to Royal, this is definitely this is the way you end the game, definitely.
Yeah. I think ideally, and I don't know how you would do this because it would be hard, but like I wish that there was like a spot where they could have put in like, before the new stuff happens, that like the original song. I don't know how you would quite do it. You'd have to have like another credit sequence, which would be weird. But it is like, because the original song is such the culmination of like the musical elements of that original game that it's sad not to have it here. But of course, like, since we've both played original Persona 5, it's more sad to me in like theory than it was experientially playing the game.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You know what they should have done? Just bring in the way they do it in the dancing game, and just have you play it with the fucking dancing note chart, and then move on with the game.
That's actually how you defeat Jaldabaoth at the end they changed it. They just put the dancing game in there, and it's just the end credit song. It's like the weird like sort of difficulty spike because it's on in like the hardest difficulty, and it's a 7-minute song. But it's like, hey, fuck it, you can do it. You just gotta practice over and over again.
Oh my god. Again, though, on the romance side, I just want to stress that there is a verse in this, and this is a good translation of the Japanese. You put a stop to that sweet, sweet fairy tale kingdom, that distorted world where I met you. You gently covered my mouth before I could say a false happiness would be enough.
Yes, like
Mr. Lotus Juice knows what he is doing.
Yes, because the phrase, particularly Japanese, like is so good because the way that like grammatically it's structured in Japanese is that the thing of like covering your mouth is the last thing that's said. So it's like this mouth that says all the things that came before it, you like softly silence, which to me, like, I think it's a little bit hard because I don't know exactly the right word to use for fusagu. But to me, the mental image is these are these two characters that are in bed, and you're about to say to him, like, it's okay. Like, this fake happiness is fine because you'll be here with me. And before you can even utter it, Akechi puts one finger over your lips and gives you a little look. And you know in that look that it's like that he's right. Right? Like, that is what 100% the, like, imagery that the phrasing conjures.
Yes.
And it's so, like, again, I cannot stress enough how explicitly romantic. Like, this isn't subtext or anything. Like, this is just, like, this would make, fucking anybody blush reading this shit. Because it's, like, so... It's so intense in its, like, kind of romantic imagery.
We just... we say it all the time and we still don't say it enough. Lotus Juice might be the best thing that ever happened to Persona. Man, that dude, he's a fucking god. I love him. I want to give him a hug one day.
100%. Yeah. He's a good follow on Twitter also, because he
is. I love
does
his
lots
Twitter
of English tweets also, and he plays like lots of games and stuff. It's always fun to see him tweet.
Yeah, he had a funny tweet the other day where he was talking about how much he's enjoying Shin Megami Tensei 5, and he's like, and the music, like, I know they're my friends, but that's not why I'm saying it. I fucking love the music in this game. It's like, it's okay, I trust you, Lotus Juice. No conflict of interest here.
Yeah, I saw that one also. Yeah.
Anyway, what else should we say about Persona 5, The Royal?
I just want to hit a little bit of the other music, because we talked about
of course, yes.
Disc 2, right? Because Disc 2 of the soundtrack is all the new stuff that plays in the January section, but you have all of like Disc 1, which is also fucking amazing. One song I want to shout out is I talked about the challenge battle stuff a little bit, but you can't talk about that without also mentioning that this might be the most ripping ass fucking guitar track in the history of Persona music, which is Prison Labor. Every Persona soundtrack since Persona 3 has had at least one track on it that exists entirely for the purposes of for Shoji Meguro to shred as hard as humanly possible on electric guitar. And it's always one of the best tracks. It's usually like a mid-boss track is what it is in Persona 5. It's the boss track in Persona 3. In Persona 4, and previously, the Persona 4's track, The Fog, which plays in one of the last boss fights in that game, was, to me, the best guitar track in Persona. And, like, if I wanted to just see Shoji Meguro's shred on electric guitar, I would look up one of the live performances where he plays The Fog, and it's amazing. Prison Labor is not as technically complicated, the guitar part, as The Fog is, but it is, I actually like it more. It's so heavy, the big fucking chunky power chords building up to this big crazy solo. It's just such a satisfying song that I legitimately would go into the challenge battle thing just to have that song play in the background while I did something else, because it's just like, it's such a satisfying song to play on loop. And I'm in love with the metal fucking guitar parts in Prison Labor, and it is also just a great name for that song too. Because that's just the title of the song, by the way. This is not like a translation of the Japanese title. It's just called, in English, Prison Labor. And that's it. And it's fucking kicks ass.
No More What Ifs is the song in the Jazz Club. That's one of my favorite Persona songs ever. It's actually one of the only ones that I had, like, just for some reason I had listened to ahead of playing the game. So I knew No More What Ifs because I adore that song. I love Lynn's lyrics. I think it's such a perfect kind of winking, knowing version of, like, the big, sad, romantic jazz club song. And I just loved being in the jazz club when the singer was in and hearing that, because it's such a cool song.
Yeah, Fantastic song. And then I know we've talked about it in one of the previous podcasts where we just kind of talked about Persona 5 Royal at the beginning of a segment, but it just deserves repeating how good Take Over, the new battle song that plays on Ambushes, is. And I love that they made the new song, the Ambush song, like I said the previous time we talked about in the podcast, where, you know, I've listened to Time to Make History more by listening to the soundtrack of Persona 4 Golden than I ever did playing that game, because you just never not get an ambush, basically. And Takeover is great. Takeover has the best first lyric of any Persona song, because, again, this is Lotus Juice writing this, and it's so good. It's, "We're rolling deep into your underground crib," which is just exactly what I want at the beginning of every single fight. It's just it's this like gangsta ass thing of like, no, you know, we're rolling deep into your underground crib. We're out here in this fucking palace. We're fucking shit up. And there's just a triumphant quality to Take Over as a song that like that is the reason why that is the first line, is that's like the tone of the song is like, we're here to just like completely fuck you up. And it's so much fun. It's as in the tradition of all these like great Persona battle music. It's a song that you hear a million times, but you never get tired of it because it's so good. And I think that this is one where I think I actually like Takeover more than Last Surprise, which is also great. But this, I think, edges it out for me.
I wouldn't go that far. I do love Takeover. I love the horn part is so crazy. I do like Last Surprise more, and I do kind of wish there was like something in the configuration where like you could switch how the two songs play. Just like, let's say you want to hear Last Surprise a little more for this palace. I wish you could, because you're usually doing ambushes, yes, right? And I do think like, for me, Last Surprise is the true Persona 5 battle music. It's that or Mass Destruction is my favorite Persona battle theme. Takeover might be number 3. I really do love Takeover. I'm not putting it down. It's just, for me, whenever I would like stumble into doing Last Surprise, I would always be like, Jesus Christ, I love this song. There's something about Last Surprise being a slower, jazzier JRPG battle theme that is so cool to me, and I've always loved that it's a little more down tempo, it's a little more subdued. There's something about it that is just infinitely replayable to me. But that is not to take anything away from Takeover, which kicks fucking ass.
I mean, again, I'll just say, Last Surprise doesn't open with the lyric, "We are rolling deep into your underground crib," and just hearing Lynn say that, I never got tired of it. It's just every single time it made me smile. It is one of those like Lotus Juiceisms in the lyrics of these songs that's just like, fucking hell yeah.
Kichijoji 199X is the song that plays when you go to play darts. It kicks ass. It's the only one that I have used as a theme song for the podcast before, because it is so good. And it's redoing like one of the main Persona themes, their Persona 5 themes, but in this like really funky way, and I love it.
Yeah, I think we mentioned Ideal in the Reel before, because there's the end version that plays over the like other bad ending or whatever. But that Ideal in the Reel is a really good, like, kind of like what I said before with Interstices of Time for Persona 3 Fest. It's one of those, just like put it on a loop and it's like study work music for me. It's just like have it in the background. It's like bum 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 dum dum. It's just like, because the song is mostly just a beat, and then occasionally a couple of instruments come over the beat and play a little piece. But it's mostly, I think it's a xylophone. It's mostly just someone on a xylophone or a xylophone-esque instrument just playing out this quick little beat melody. And it's very satisfying to listen to.
Colors Flying High is the new opening. There's a new version of the Persona 5 Royal soundtrack, a standalone version, because the soundtrack was only ever packaged in, but now in Japan this month they're coming out with a standalone soundtrack that will have the full version of Colors Flying High, which I've been wanting to hear, because so far we've only had the 90-second opening, so it's kind of hard to gauge this song against other ones. I really like it. It's a good Persona song. I think it kind of pales in comparison to Wake Up, Get Up, Get Out There, which is like one of my 5 favorite Persona songs ever, and I kind of miss it at the beginning of this game. But I do like Colors Flying High, and the animation on the Colors Flying High opening is crazy good.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with you. I think it's got a little bit of, this is how I also felt about Persona 4 The Golden, of like, it's just a thing where the original opening theme of the game is so tied into the identity of the game and a lot of like the musical leitmotifs and stuff that it's like, there are lots of like reasons why you replace it, because you can advertise it and all this kind of stuff. But it is the thing where it's like, it's not going to be as good as the original, but the animation is fucking amazing, and particularly the imagery of like all the characters in this like little cardboard version of Tokyo smashing it up with baseball bats and then turning into little gems, and then you get your money shot of the protagonist and Akechi like lying down with the gems, basically
snow angels.
the fan art thing I was just making a joke about before. It didn't even occur to me. It's like it is exactly that shot in here. It's just they're not almost kissing, because that would maybe be slightly too much to put it at the very beginning of your game. But yes, it is
Yes.
the game just is setting up exactly what it's doing in that sequence, and it's fucking great.
It is indeed. And that is the only one in here that, at least on my version of the soundtrack, is credited to Benjamin Franklin as the lyricist and not Lotus Juice. He did everything else on this one. Benjamin Franklin, if you don't know, this is not the American founding father. This is a Japanese lyricist who did the songs for Persona 5, the vanilla version.
Yeah, and he did a lot of lyrics in other Persona games as well. It's funny because I'm so used to seeing the name specifically as like Persona music, lyrics by Benjamin Franklin. Somehow it didn't even occur to me that, oh yes, there is a much more famous Benjamin Franklin that is not the guy who does the lyrics for a bunch of the English songs in Persona games.
You know, who knows? Maybe Benjamin Franklin never died. He fell into a time vortex. He came out in modern-day Japan, and he decided, fuck it, I'm taking a job at Atlus.
I believe it.
That would be...
Benjamin Franklin was fucking cool. He could write some pretty sick licks, you know? It's like he knows what's up.
Yeah, he had a lot of time convalescing from all the different strains of syphilis he had.
Exactly.
That is a weird note to end on.
We should end on that note.
No, we shouldn't end on that note. I have one other thing, Sean. So I asked my brother Thomas, is there anything you want us to say on the Persona 5 Royal podcast? And he texted me back an hour or two ago, so halfway through this podcast, and said, don't forget to talk about the lyrics. We did that. And Akechi. We did that. And the third form personas. We did that. And the new Hawaii scenes. There are some good new Hawaii scenes. There's the one where Yoshizawa comes in and ambushes you, and that is very funny and cute.
Mm-hmm. It's also,
and the Showtime.
They have White Day scenes that are like a follow-up to the Valentine's Day one, and I enjoyed that as well.
I loved those, yeah. Those are really good. And the Showtimes, we did that. Oh, here's a good one we didn't mention yet, Sean, which is when Yoshizawa dances at the festival.
Uh-huh.
That is a fantastic scene. One of the coolest pieces of animation. There's actually a significant number of new animated cutscenes in this game. I would kill for them to put out a Blu-ray of all the animated cutscenes, because I know they're on a Blu-ray for the game, but they're kind of compressed to fit in the game disc. I would love just nice, full HD, uncompressed versions, because they are so gorgeous.
Yeah, that Yoshizawa scene is a very good example of where they find very smart, effective ways to integrate her into the existing story. Because that's a really good one. And yeah, and all the new animated cutscenes were all done by the same people. It's the same team as well, so like they all blend very naturally into the rest of the presentation.
Mm-hmm. And the mice puzzles in Shido's Palace, we did that. Yep. And Kishijoji, we did that. And the crossword puzzles. Didn't mention the crossword puzzles. I do love the crossword. Yeah. Those are fun.
Yeah, those are very good. Some of the, like, I do wish that I could see, like, I wish I could flip a switch and just see what the Japanese ones are, because sometimes you can see the English person struggling to be like, well, this is a very Japanese thing. And I'm curious if they changed any of them outright or anything like that and just made it something totally different, because I have to imagine that is a very hard thing to try to do.
Yeah. And the Thieves' Den, we didn't talk about the Thieves' Den. That's basically the same thing that Persona 4 had, where you can go in and buy all the videos and see all other stuff. It is cool.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's definitely the kind of thing of where this is the updated re-release version of the game, so we have enough additional resources to do the kind of fun things around the edges that, you know, developers always want to do, but are always the things like first on the chopping block of, do we really need this like big 3D explorable area where you can look at the concept art in the movies? It's like, would you rather have that, or would you rather have this boss fight actually work? And it's obviously it's going to go to the boss fight, but it's one of the things that's nice about these kinds of products is that they just get that little extra level, that little extra touch. I particularly like that you can go in and you can, on like top floor, you can change your character model and run around as the other characters. You can't do anything, but you just get to look at their walk cycles and be like, hey, I can push the analog stick and be Morgana, and that's a good time.
I actually haven't done that yet. I need to do that.
Yeah.
And finally, Thomas says, and Jose. We didn't talk about Jose. Jose is weird. I don't know who Jose is. There's some implication he's working for someone that we know, but I don't know who that is.
I think the implication is supposed to be that he's an agent of Philemon, who is a character that goes to like Persona 1 and the Persona 2s that they never really brought into the main Persona games, but Philemon is the master that Igor serves. So I think that's
Oh.
it's one of the things that they tend to do this. They tend to like put here's like something that will never be followed up on that is mostly meaningless, but sort of gestures at like a sort of like vague, bigger mythology behind everything. Like the Persona 4 Arena games did that. The Persona 2 re-releases did the same thing. Of just like here's like a little thingy for you to look at. That's mostly, I mean, it exists because they wanted to have a character that did the new gameplay stuff so they created Jose. But then I imagine they were just like, we need to have some sort of vague narrative justification for why there's a weird robot boy who drives around in Mementos. So let's connect him, like not explicitly connect him to Philemon, but just vaguely connect him to Philemon so that nerds like me who played the old Persona games can go like, that's probably reference to Philemon.
Well, there you go. This is your long-awaited Persona 5 Royal podcast. We did it. I think we did it justice. We certainly did it for fucking long enough. My back hurts.
Yeah, we've been podcasting for longer than just recording this podcast, just to let everybody know that who's listening.
Yep.
As we close out, Jonathan, I want to close out this podcast with our time-honored tradition of the dramatic readings of Persona lyrics, because I want to read dramatically the lyrics to Colors Flying High, the one by Benjamin Franklin, because while Lotus Juice is the best lyricist, because he's the best lyricist, in some ways it's like he's the worst one to do the dramatic readings for, because his lyrics are actually really good. But Colors Flying High has some very fun lyrics. But before I do that, do you have any last message for us on our Persona 5 The Royal long time coming podcast?
It is one of, if not the best games ever made. I think in my heart of hearts, my heart still belongs to Persona 3, is still my favorite Persona, but you cannot deny what a goddamn masterpiece Persona 5 The Royal is.
I 100% agree. So I will now begin Colors Flying High by Benjamin Franklin. Your flag, your alibi, can you hide behind claiming might is right? Raise your fist to the sky while below your boots common men die. Colors fly, tell us who to love and who to hate, and by the by will the memories of our morals fade. Staying true to your own convictions in this haze is harder to do than say. So choose a color to live by, your goal, your faith, your virtue. Give it all. Be the best, 'cause nothing less will do. You can rule the world with colors flying high. You know that if you stay true, green or blue, red or white, you can't lose with your colors flying high.